Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, my name is Megan Sathry. I'm with the Lewis County Planning Department, and I want to welcome you to the Planning Commission public meeting today. This meeting is taking place in person, streaming live via Zoom, and it is being recorded. For those joining us via Zoom, please remember to mute your phone or device when you're not speaking. If you forget to mute your phone or device, we will mute you. Tonight's meeting is a workshop on the Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update and the Packwood Subarea Plan. A reminder, the Zoom chat feature is modified, so participants may report technical difficulties directly to myself. No public comment or questions will be taken through the chat feature. We will start with a roll call. The following planning commissioners are present in the room: Commissioner Spogan, Commissioner Corbin, and Commissioner Chastain. The following planning commissioners are present on Zoom: Commissioner Russell, Commissioner Alves, and Commissioner Fritsch. And the following planning commissioners are absent: Commissioner Foster. With 6 planning commissioners present, we do have a quorum. We're now ready to begin. Chair Spogan.
Thank you. My name is Lori Spogan, and I'd like to call the order the February 14, 2023 meeting of Lewis County Planning Commission. Prior to tonight, the commission received the agenda for today, and the agenda is displayed on the screen. I would like to entertain a motion and a second from the Planning Commission to approve the agenda.
I move to approve that agenda.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. And let's all vote.
Aye.
Aye.
I approve.
Okay, the motion passes with 6 yes votes.
Thank you. Also, prior to tonight, the commission received the meeting notes from the January 28th, 2023 meeting. There is a correction that I would like to mention. It's on page 3, paragraph 2. It reads, quote, "There is at least," is the correction, "one house that is 12,000 square feet. Prices are going up everywhere, but especially in rural Lewis County." So can I get a motion on the corrected minutes?
I move to approve the meeting notes as amended.
I second that.
Thank you, and vote.
Aye.
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 The motion passes with 6 yes votes.
Thank you. Tonight, are there any members of the public that would like to provide comments? Please note that the public comments are different than testimony, and any comments that the public wants to provide on an item that will come to Planning Commission for a vote should be submitted as testimony when the record is open. Is there anybody tonight on?
We have no members of the public in the room, and if you are on Zoom and you would like to testify, please use the raise your hand option, or you can send a chat. Okay, I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Then we'll move along to the first item. Tonight's a workshop on the Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update. The purpose of a work session is for the staff to present information about the topic and the commission to ask questions. No public comments on the proposal will be taken during the workshop. So I'll turn it over to Mindy.
Thank you, Chair Spogan. Mindy Brooks, Senior Long Range Planner. So the first item on the agenda tonight is Lewis County Planning, Comprehensive Plan and the Periodic Update. So this is something that we are going to, you're going to see this a lot from us. We're going to have this agenda item many times in front of you. And I am going to try to be very clear with you when I'm just bringing you information versus when I need a decision from you on something. Tonight is information only. So there's no action on this item tonight, but we are headed into some tight timelines that I'm going to go over with you guys on some early periodic update items. Next slide. So I will back up first and talk a little bit back about what periodic update is under comprehensive plan. We discussed this a couple meetings ago, but refresher really quick. And then we're going to dive into the specific items of tonight, which is population allocations and housing allocations. Next slide. So we used this diagram last time, and I will keep bringing this one in front of you so that you get really familiar with this one too. So one of your primary responsibilities with Planning Commission is to make recommendations related to the comprehensive plan. Just a reminder, comprehensive plan is goals and policies. It's not implementation. So implementation is how we implement the goals and policies. That's the zoning map and the development regulations. The comp plan is just goals and policies. And that is where all this work that we're going to talk about for like the next year falls related to comp plan. Next slide. So the comp plan has a number of required elements. Economic development, land use, housing, transportation, and utilities and capital facilities are required of the Growth Management Act that we address those. The On Alaska Subarea plan is optional. Subarea plans are optional. So Packwood is a Subarea plan that is also on our agenda tonight and coming before you. It's an optional element underneath of the comprehensive plan. We're not going to go into any of the details about these specifics. What we're going to talk about are precursors. So there are two things that we have to do in advance of updating goals and policies, and that's population allocation and housing allocation. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But I will encourage you, as your time allows and you're just dying for some great reading, open up that document there, the little link that we have, and get yourself familiar with the existing comp plan before we start going into updates on it. Okay. So let's dive into population allocations. Next slide. So every 5 years, Office of Financial Management gives the county an updated 20-year forecast. So they do it every 5 years. They do an updated 20-year forecast for the county, all counties in Washington. They give us a high, medium, low. What it is really is they give you they say they give you a high, medium, low. What they really give you is a medium. And that is what they believe is our likely 20-year population forecast. And then they just do a statistical standard deviation above and below to bracket it. We have to pick within that bracketed range in there, or else we have to do a lot of additional work. So somewhere between the low and the high is where we need to land. And then our job as the county is we need to allocate that one population number out to each of the cities. So it is our responsibility as the county to allocate to each city what portion of the 20-year population is going to be theirs to account for in their comprehensive plan. So the way we go about allocating is through coordination. So this is not something where we sit back and say, hey, Toledo, guess what your population is going to be? We do this through the Planned Growth Committee. So the work that's going to come before you and some of the early stuff I'm going to show you tonight, it's vetted through the Planned Growth Committee. They will make a recommendation to you. And so the Planned Growth Committee, I'll talk about that, sorry, just in a second, but it'll come to you as a recommendation. So you will have their vetting that's already done with it. You will hold a public hearing on allocations and make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, who will also hold a hearing. And those Planned Growth Committees are open to the public. So there's a lot of opportunity if people are just dying to know about population allocations and housing allocations to pay attention. But the BOCC is the final decision maker. Next slide. So Planned Growth Committee, just as a reminder, the committee is made up of the mayor of each jurisdiction or their designee, and the chair of the Board of County Commissioners. So that is the committee themselves. They are a committee. They are required to vote on things. They run under parliamentary procedure, just like you guys do. Myself, I should say, staff and consultants are highly encouraged to attend the Planned Growth Committee meetings. So they're not voting members, but we really encourage that the cities bring the staff that are actually doing the work or their consultant to those meetings to participate. So they have full participation ability, but no voting ability. Myself and Lee Napier facilitate. We are also not voting members. We staff and facilitate it. They meet monthly for 2 hours. And this, what they do, so they do population and housing allocations. They also are the ones that process the urban growth area amendments before they recommend those on to you. So those go to them first. And they can also amend countywide planning policies, and those come to you as well. So last year, you guys, the work that they did resulted in 3 UGA expansions for you to consider, the Centralia and 2 Chehalis ones, and those came before you. This year, they're going to be recommending population and housing allocations shortly, in just a few months for you to consider.
Mindy,
Yeah.
what does population housing recommendations mean? What do
There
you
are two
mean,
different
how-
things, population
Oh,
allocations and housing allocations, and I'm going to talk through both.
okay, all right.
Yeah, I'll try not to slur my words. It's been a really long day. I'll do my best. Okay, so we're talking population first. And I just want to start with why is this important? Each of the city's comprehensive plans has to address the 20-year population forecast. They need to size their urban growth areas to accommodate 20 years of growth. And they need to demonstrate that they're going to provide urban services, so that's sewer and water, to that area. So it's really important to right size that population allocation and not, just pick a number. We need to try and get as close as we can so that when they update their comp plans, just like we're about to do, they're on the same timeline as us, they're using a number that is as correct as we can be, given that it's kind of a crystal ball projection into the future. So I think, and then the other thing is that this is now an input into housing allocations, and you're going to see in a minute how serious that is as well. So it's really important that we focus on population allocations. We're spending a lot of time on that with the Plan Growth Committee as well. Okay, let's get technical.
And these numbers are good for 5 years?
They are. And so in 5 years, OFM will give the next projection, and everybody has an opportunity. Again, we have to allocate again. And then, so it's not like you do it once and then you wait 20 years, because obviously we know life changes way more than that. So, yep, every 5 years. Okay, next slide. We're going to get technical here. These are preliminary growth allocations that I'm going to share, and I'm doing this to explain the process. I want you to not get attached to numbers. They will 100% change by the next time you see them. These numbers are not what you're going to see next time. So please don't be like really excited about one city's population number. It's going to change. What I want to do tonight is cover the process, how we're going about allocating, so that you can understand that and ask me questions right now. Okay, so what we do, what do? We start with the population 20 years ago. So we look at what the population was, and OFM gives that to us. So Office of Financial Management does yearly estimates on the city limits and the urban growth areas. So we have all that data. So we bring in what was done what the estimates were 20 years ago. So in 2002, the city limits and the urban growth area. We combine that up, and that's the city's total population 20 years ago, right? Then we take the 2022. So 20 years later, what's the 2022? Again, OFM gives us city limit and UGA. So we take the 2022 city limit population and the city's UGA and combine those up. So now you've got 20 years ago and last year's total populations for each city. We use that to determine the 20-year growth rate. So that's the final column there. You can see over 20 years how much each city did grow. So just top line, let's just look at Centralia. They had a population total of 18,621. They grew to 22,376. That's a 20.17% growth rate. So that's the first step, is just what happened in the past. And again, we look at both the city limits and the UGA. That's what we consider the city total. So we're looking at both of those. Next slide. So then what we do is we take that historic growth rate and we apply it forward. So we say, great, first column is that 2022 population. What was your combined population? And then we apply the 20-year growth rate historic going out forward, and that gives us their 2025 or 2045 population. So we just use historic data to shoot out a population in the front, and it tells us how much each city is going to grow, right? What I need to be really clear about here is this is preliminary, and the reason why I know the numbers are going to change is because this is just historic growth trends. And what I've asked each city to do is to consider what other data they would like to bring to bear to make sure that that growth rate is correct. So
Can you go
for
back
example,
one slide, Mindy?
What's that?
This is Bob. Could you go back right to that slide?
Sure.
And so when I heard you talk about Centralia, under the 2002 OFM estimate, city limits, I assumed, started in 2002 at 15,000. And they were going to estimate for the next, through the UGA, what is that 18,000? Was that their estimate of what we were going to be in 2022?
No, that is, so these are both these are both OFM estimates. So these are non-census year. So we don't have census year data. We have OFM estimates for city limits and UGA.
They're
Just-
not projections.
It's not a
Commissioner.
projection. This is an estimate for what it actually was in 2022.
So the growth rate from 2002 to 2022 was 20%.
That's
for
right.
Centralia.
That's right.
And it went from what number to what number to be 20%?
From the column that says total under 2002, which was 18,621, to the column of total under 2022, which was 22,376.
Got it. I'll buy that. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
No, absolutely. This is why we're doing it tonight. So you guys can ask these questions
And
tonight.
I think the thing I wanted to bring up is we're looking at a 20-year period growing 20%. We're
For
not
Centra-
looking
for
at
Centralia.
20% year over year. If you
Correct.
first pop this up, it looks like a really horrendously fast growth rate.
It is over a 20-year period. You're right.
Thank
That is
you.
not a year-over-year growth rate. That would be a
Okay.
different number.
Yeah, thanks. That's all I needed.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, so is there a comparison to previous 20-year estimates so that there was a historical perspective of estimated growth over the last, how far back do these records go?
Yeah, we can go back. I mean, I can go back as far as we have census data to continue to look back. And it's, as I'm sure you know, things go up and down quite a bit under growth trends. So it's not a,
But I would think
Yeah.
that there should, would be some good information to know, what those growth rates were in previous 20-year blocks, and we could probably, pair it to, economic upturns, downturns, whatever, 9/11. I mean, lots of, major events that might give us, more information to make our projections.
yeah,
you know.
yeah. I mean, I can certainly share with you the different growth rates that we've seen over time. Sure.
But Mindy, this is, they used estimated because you said that's not a census year. But essentially what they're trying to do is do this through a census, not just how many houses times 4 people in a house or something.
Right. So OFM's been doing this for a very long time, and they have a standardized process they use for the whole state to
Okay.
provide these estimates. And they are always righted during a census year,
I see.
corrected up,
Okay.
right? So we had a census year in 2020. So the data from 2020 is census data.
Okay.
So this is what this is part of their job, but we can certainly provide additional growth information going back. Okay, let's go to that next slide there. So what I wanted to make sure that you were aware of is that I've asked the cities to come back to Plan Growth Committee actually tomorrow and to decide if they want to bring other information forward besides just historic growth trend, right? For example, it is likely that Winlock is going to bring the number of approved development permits for new housing that's already been approved but not built. And that's more than 786. 786 is low, and we're very aware of that. And they are aware of that, right? So what I've asked the cities to do is, cities, you tell me what data you want to bring forward to augment this information. And it has to be data-driven. We can't just make guesstimates here. So each city has been asked to do that. They can rely simply on the historic growth trend if they feel that this is sufficient, or if they do not have the staff and resources to do additional work, which many of our smaller jurisdictions do not have the staff and resources to do this. They can happily rely on historic growth trend, and that's fine. But I do suspect that many of our cities are going to bring additional information because they are growing faster than this. We've seen, particularly since COVID, we've seen some serious uptick in growth here. So I expect a number of these to go up.
May I say something? Don't you think part of it is with the housing trend and the sales that went just crazier than heck?
Oh, yeah.
In 2019, 2020. Now those have staved off. Now, is it going to pick up again? Absolutely. But yeah, this is low for Winlock. I
It's
don't know. who
extremely
can
low, and we
really
all know
bear it.
that.
We
Yeah.
already know there's like 1,500 homes coming.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I was like, please don't get tied to any of these numbers. They're going to change by the next time you see them. Some of these numbers are going to change significantly by the next time you see them. I just want you to understand the process that we're going through. So when the cities provide data and methodology to me, I will be able to share with you what each of the cities is planning on providing to us as that. And of course, they're all vetting it in their committee as well. Okay, next slide. So that's the cities. Let's talk about the county. So the first thing we need to do to figure out the county's growth rate is that we need to subtract out the cities and the UGAs, right? So the OFM does a population estimate for unincorporated areas, but it includes all unincorporated, which includes the city's urban growth areas. And so there's a potential double count here if we don't subtract out, because we counted the city UGAs with them, because that's what they need to plan for. So the first step is we take that population that we have from OFM and we subtract out all the UGA areas so that we're only looking at the truly rural unincorporated county population. Then what we do is we do a little less of a strong methodology here and we apply a growth rate to it. We don't necessarily go back and look at our trends, and I'll tell you why. Growth Management Act has a strong overall policy that growth belongs in cities. It belongs in urban growth areas. The county should not be growing at a 20% growth rate. We should be driving growth to cities. That is what the Growth Management Act tells us to do. So we do need to necessarily depress our growth rate so that we are putting the growth in the cities where the growth management intends it to go. In the future, we'll have more of a conversation about how we want to look at our own percentage. But for now, I've put in 10%. Year over year, Lewis County is growing at about 10 or 11%. So it's about right at where we're growing. We have grown way more than that in the past 3 years as well, but we probably don't want to use that to augment our numbers. We want to look at our year over year, which is about 10 or 11%. So we put that in. So we're using 10% right now. Shoot that out over the next 20 years. That's our growth. That gives us everything, right? So now we've got the cities with their UGAs, and we've got our unincorporated, truly unincorporated areas. And it gives us that third column, which is change in population. So this is how much each city and the unincorporated area, how many people we anticipate to be there. We use that to determine in the last column share of population. So of the total growth that we're going to see across the whole county, what share of that is going to Centralia? What share of that's going to Chehalis? What share of that's going to each of them, right? So again, I don't want you to get hung up on the numbers, but this share of population is the number that goes into housing allocations. So this last final column of what share of population growth belongs to each city in the unincorporated areas, that's the input to the next stage. I'm going to stop. That's where we're at with this techie stuff. More questions about population allocation before we go to the next one, which just gets harder. The math just gets harder. I'm just warning you.
Mindy, this is Gretchen. Is there any way do you just sort of evenly proportion the unincorporated across all the towns, all the
not towns?
Yeah.
Yes. We have to assign a population to the Onalaska urban growth area. And if the choice is made to implement the Packwood Subarea plan with an urban growth area, we will need to assign a population there as well. And those two would come out of the unincorporated number. So you're not seeing Onalaska here, at this time, but it will be in there probably next time I show this to you or the time after. And then again with Packwood, an option of implementation, phase 2, something we're not considering right now, but in phase 2, one option is to apply an urban growth area to Packwood. If we do that, we must assign a population to that urban growth area. That makes sense?
So as it is now, the Randall, Glenoma, Solcombs of the county, does it just get split evenly, that unincorporated number, that unincorporated growth?
Yeah, we don't assign it to any of those Lammards.
Got it.
So it's just wherever the population goes.
Okay.
Hey, Mindy, this is Bob. I have a math question. When I'm looking at that unincorporated down there, 42,629, and you said you assigned 10%, and you got the 4263. That 10% is over 20 years. Is that correct?
That is correct. We did not do
But
it.
you
year
keep
over year.
saying, you say, then correct in my head something you said when you said, but we know Lewis County grows 10% year over year. Well, if you did 10% year over year, then you'd be at 100, I don't know, 200,000 by the time you were 20 years down the road.
Right. So we're not going to calculate it out that way because it blows the numbers completely out of the water and it's not realistic.
But you're
So
saying the
what-
population in the county has grown each year over 4,000
Let
people
me-
for the last 3 years? Is that
No,
what
let
you're
me
saying?
clarify. Sorry, Bob, let me clarify. What we have tracked year over year is unincorporated Lewis County, which includes the urban growth area boundaries, because OFM, when they give you the estimate for unincorporated, it's the entirety of the unincorporated, not city areas.
Okay.
That, which includes the UGA of Centralia, if you put it out the entire way, has been growing at about 10 or 11% year over year. We don't have a way to really easily calculate backwards what a reasonable growth rate is going to be for the unincorporated Lewis County that does not include urban growth areas. It's not as easy to estimate it backwards. So what we've simply done, and this will be a discussion point later, is we've just applied a 10% growth rate to us. When we go to the housing piece, I think you're going to see why we really don't want to up that. We want to drive growth and housing into urban areas. And I think you're going to really see that when we pop to the next section, which means choosing a low growth rate. And I know this math is really weird. It's very hard to try and account for UGAs. I'll tell you why. We are the only county in the entirety of Washington that lets the cities develop urban areas outside, really develop the urban area in the urban growth area like it's a city. Nobody else does that. They say, you want to develop this out like a normal suburban, neighborhood with all the stuff, annex it and then go right ahead and do it. We don't do that. We've always had these ILAs where we let people just keep developing and keep developing and keep developing. It disincentivizes annexation. It's not a really good way to do it, but we've done it since the beginning. So it's a long-standing way that we do it. But what it means is our city populations don't reside in city limits like they should and like they do everywhere else in the state. So when OFM and Commerce are doing all their estimates, they're not doing it for Lewis County, the weird anomaly. They're doing it for the rest of the state. And we got to figure out how to deal with it here, which is a little hard. We're weird.
So was that a commissioner decision, county commissioner decision years and years ago?
I
Or
don't
do
want
we
to
know?
put a whole bunch of politics in the middle of it, but I
Did-
really think that there was this attitude of kind of screw the state for making us do it and we're going to do this our own way kind of attitude.
Oh, okay. I wasn't trying to go there
No,
necessarily.
but I think that's really
Yeah,
what it was.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
And there was certainly a land grab too. People's UGAs are gigantic because people were afraid that they would lose options within the land. And that makes it very difficult to plan when you have a UGA that's oversized. Eric, do you want to chime in? Sorry, I didn't see you because I have my presentation up. Eric's online and can provide additional insight into why we have to do weirdness here.
I just wanted to answer the question of why it was done that way, in a way that was a little bit more kind to the decision makers back then. So the theory was that the urban growth area was the area in which the city was going to expand, and that if the city had control of the way that the urban growth area developed and expanded, it would make it match the city and be easier for them to annex in. I mean, that was, whether that's true or not, I think that in practice, it's not true. I think that was what they were proceeding under, is that they thought is that the cities had these agreements where they would manage the UGAs. They tended to be the more sophisticated cities anyway, and the theory was that they would be able to zone for those areas so that then they would be what the city wanted, and then they would adopt them in. It just so happens that all of the cities, including the most sophisticated cities, have had trouble that because they zoned the UGAs, and because the development occurred there without someone needing to annex into the city to get the benefit of the city controlling those things, like, it did not create enough of an incentive for people to want to annex first, which was not great for the cities, because if the development occurred before the city annexed, it turns out that it didn't really pencil monetarily for the city to extend services. They really needed the annexations to occur earlier than they did. So basically, the theory under which the county did this, which was with the city's request and consent, it didn't really work out in practice, but I don't think it was meant, that aspect of our planning, I don't think was meant to thumb our nose at the state. It was just like basically a bet on something that turned out to be wrong.
Yeah, what we've seen practically come out of this is that it's very hard to annex in our county. So, should we talk about housing? All right, let's talk about housing. Okay. So I'll just start with, we've not done housing allocations before. This is brand new. Okay, so unlike population, where this is something that's been done since growth management every 5 years, it's something that continues to be done. We have not done this. This is a direct result of House Bill 1220. It said that each county and each city must provide housing at each income bracket, and I will define those in just a second. The bill directed Commerce to create guidance about how to provide housing at each income bracket. Using that guidance, the counties are required to allocate housing to each of the cities and the unincorporated area, just like we do population. Again, we coordinate this through Planned Growth Committee. So they're going to vet the population and they're going to vet the housing. So when those numbers, the final numbers come to you, they will have gone through the Planned Growth Committee first. Again, it comes to you as recommendation. Board of County Commissioners is the decision maker. Next slide. Per Commerce guidance, the main input to the housing allocations is that share of population growth. So that very last number, what share of overall population growth is assigned to each city in the unincorporated area, that's the number that we put into Commerce. There's their allocation thing that you're going to see in a second. So for example, Napa Vine's share of population growth is 3.08%. So that's just, the number that we're going to throw into the model. Commerce has a model that they've produced for us. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It is a black box right now. I'm not going to be able to answer many questions about how they're calculating the numbers. We are very much hoping that when they finalize it, we haven't received a final yet, that when we see the final, that it won't be a black box, that we will see the formulas that go behind the numbers. But we don't have that right now. Okay, so I'm going to show you a sheet out of their next slide there. So we're going to focus on Chehalis just because I need an example to show you. So let's look at Chehalis. So their share of population growth, that very first column is 12.48%. So that means that, given that, Chehalis has an estimated, again, this is an estimate that Commerce has provided for us. They have an estimated 3,139 existing housing units, and they will need to add 786 more housing units. So that's the total housing units that they have estimated and that they will need to produce over the next 20 years based on Commerce calculations. Those new housing, that total, it needs to be split up based on income range. So that first section is the 0 to 30% area median income. So people making 0 to 30% of area median income is an income bracket. Excuse me. It's the lowest income bracket. So combined up between non-permanent supportive housing and permanent supportive housing, which are two different subcategories in there that we can discuss in detail, they need to provide 359 housing units at that lowest income bracket. So then you go to the next one, 30 to 50% AMI, they need to provide 151 housing units at that income bracket. And you can go on up all the way up to 120% AMI. They also include an emergency, that's shelters. So they need 60, need to be able to provide 60 by 2045. What you need to keep in mind is that these numbers are guidance. Chehalis doesn't actually have to provide these housing units. What Chehalis will have to do, what all the cities will have to do, what we will have to do is we have to show that we've zoned land to allow for housing that is affordable at these income brackets. So they will need to update their zoning to demonstrate that they have the capacity of land that they can provide that type of housing. They don't actually have to do it. That's really important because when you're looking at below 50%, that's subsidized housing, right? The market's never going to produce that for you. You're going to have to subsidize it. So what they need to do is zone for apartments, because that's what you're going to be able to afford at those lower income brackets. They don't actually have to prove that they provide these units. The other thing that Chehalis, all the cities, us all need to do is we need to look through all of our regulations and make sure there are no barriers to these types of housing. So we need to remove regulatory barriers for things like shelters and permanent supportive housing, make sure that they can go in. So that's really the two things that everybody's on the hook for. So it comes back to a land capacity and zoning question. And that's what everybody's going to have to demonstrate. What we have to do is do these allocations. We have to say, given your share of population growth, these are the allocations that you're going to get. Right now, Commerce has given us two methodologies. I'm not going to walk through them in detail right now. I'm just saying that we have two different options. Those will come back in front of you. We are allowed to come up with another methodology. I think we're going to need to, because again, we're weird and we have our UGA populations to deal with. So I think we're going to have to tweak their methodologies and come up with our own. And we will do that through Plan Growth Committee, come back and talk with you guys about that. So I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but do you have high level questions right now about it before I say one more thing about housing?
Yeah, maybe this is really, really high. So when zoning is determined, how do you earmark, the 50% level, the 80% level, the 100% level? I mean, I don't recall seeing anything on my property that said I'm a 80%er, or if I'm 120%er. So how does that distinction show up someplace?
Absolutely. So the way you would do this is you would say, as a city, you'd say, I've zoned, I'm just going to totally make numbers up here for you. I've zoned an acre of our city to allow high density multifamily housing only. No single family housing is allowed here, no duplexes, no triplexes. We're looking at high density apartment complex only. So you've actually not allowed things that are typically at that 80 and up. So now you're only looking at housing that is typically affordable, below a certain percentage. And you can calculate out based on what the zone is and what your allowed uses are, the capacity of that acre. How many apartments would go into that acre if it developed at full capacity? And capacity analysis is a very common thing that planners do. So this is a pretty common thing that they can bring forward and say, this acre can, on total, it's going to have 36. It can have 36 apartment complexes. And so that's the way that they can show that they're starting to meet these allocations, is to zone for certain things.
So if it was zoned for that density, what would preclude a developer, say it was a nice area, and they wanted to put in expensive condos? I mean, that would price people out of the same space. Am I thinking right? Or
No, you're right. And so this is why I think it's important to understand that these are guidance numbers and that you just have to do a capacity analysis. What actually happens is going to be different. And I think what the hope is that every jurisdiction recognizes we need people to be able to live in our jurisdictions. And what this is trying to say is, in order for that to happen, you actually do need housing at this lower income level, or else your people in your city can't afford to live in your city. And so that means that likely the city government needs to be working on subsidy for permanent supportive housing, right? Nonprofits need to be working on that subsidized piece of it so that they're actually providing housing, not just hitting the zoning capacity for those. Because you're right, if you just let the market do what the market's going to do, it's not going to produce actual housing below 50%. It doesn't do that because it doesn't pencil, right? The market needs to be above that. So much of the scary part of this is subsidized, and that's why they're not saying you have to hit those numbers. You just need to show that you've zoned with capacity and you removed regulatory barriers to it. I mean, frankly, if we had to hit the numbers that are in here, we'd all go bankrupt immediately. It's a lot. So. Other questions about this? I know it's kind of a black box right now. I'm hoping I'll be able to give you more methodology, but we don't have that yet.
I have a question, Mindy. It's Gretchen again. So is the only way that you can on paper satisfy this requirement is by density and square footage? Is that
That's the primary recommendation of Commerce, is for cities to zone for the housing types and densities.
they're not requiring the county subsidize or any other creative ways of making land or buildings affordable. It's just pretty rudimentary, like number of units per acre equation.
That's the primary way that they're recommending that cities account for this.
Okay. Thank you.
Eric, do you want to add to that other, I'm trying to remember, it's been a long day, some of the other guidance around how to comply?
Yes. So I think that it's not merely density and square footage. There also is some stuff on the other hand about removing barriers. You know, that phrase, go through your zoning and look at barriers, is really vague and undefined right now. I'm sure it will get more defined, and the things that they'll be talking about will be things like, what area in your city do you allow multifamily housing? Because many jurisdictions actually zone out multifamily in large areas, and it's only single family, and they sometimes have minimum lot sizes, and those things can make it more expensive, right? They might have development design standards, which require that the units be more expensive, like requiring a 2-car garage for every unit of housing. Those are types of things that would clearly increase the cost of units and would tend to price them out of certain income brackets. And we believe, although we don't have any specific evidence yet, that something motivating Commerce's guidance on this is a sort of general philosophy that many cities have taken steps to make housing more expensive than it otherwise would be. In other words, that they have intentionally put barriers to what they consider to be cheap, crappy units in their codes, and that developers don't develop them. And so I think the theory is that forcing them to potentially zone and change their standards would actually change the market dynamics somewhat. It's still the case that probably no one can build market rate units for people at 0 to 30% AMI, or maybe even 50% AMI. But I think the theory is that some people might be able to build market rate units for maybe 50 to 80% AMI if they were allowed to do so, and the city had not intentionally sort of tried to minimize those types of units. Now, I want to point out that from a rural perspective, I strongly disagree with that undercurrent of the guidance, because I think it is only true in the Middle Sound counties, Pierce and King and Snohomish, where they have urban jurisdictions that are sophisticated enough to have done that intentionally in a way that they could reverse and make a difference. In rural jurisdictions, I believe that we don't have apartment buildings or affordable housing in some locations because the cities that are really small would struggle mightily in attempting to serve those populations. And that the entire bent or philosophy is maybe not a right fit for some of the smaller jurisdictions. But still, I think that dynamic is there, and I expect that whether it comes from commerce or whether it comes from citizen organizations attempting to infuse meaning into the Growth Management Act, we will see a kind of like sea change in cases challenging cities and counties about how they need to make their development regulations more friendly to less expensive units in order to meet these goals. That's not something that commerce is saying, but it's definitely something that I am reading the tea leaves on, that I think that once you in your comp plan have these goals and you are supposed to meet them, that if you aren't meeting them in practice, someone is going to come and say, well, you need to change your development regulations so that you meet them. And I do think that that's something we'll be seeing over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this is something that we have been expressing to Commerce strongly, that what they are doing here is really sound for the Puget Sound, and that it does not look at rural counties right, but we're not getting a lot of headway. So
yeah, I would say the best example of that is PL, which under this analysis will have a housing allocation that suggests they should have some housing for people of 0 to 30% AMI, including permanent supportive housing. And PL, not through any kind of prejudice against poor people. It has no police, it has no nonprofits that can provide services, it has no hospitals, no behavioral health clinics. It's really not a good place to have those facilities. And that's not because they don't like people, it's because the city doesn't have services. So I do think that this is going to be a challenge for them.
yeah, it's the smaller jurisdictions are going to struggle, as is Lewis County. And I'm not going to show you Lewis County numbers yet. But Megan, would you pop up a slide one back up to the slide before? So you see our share growth rate, 36.85%. Now pop back down to the one that we were just on. The share of growth rate for Chehalis is 12.4%. So that number, that artificial 10% growth, results in us taking 36% of the total growth rate, and it gives us a lot of housing in types of housing that we cannot zone for. We can't zone for multifamily housing unless if there is water and sewer available.
Isn't that kind of deceptive because it doesn't include the UGAs though? Because the UGAs could totally be zoned for that density. We just don't have
Yep.
control over it.
Absolutely. So this is why I was saying the methodology for us in Lewis County is going to need to be tweaked. Right now, this methodology is not written for Lewis County because Lewis County is weird and we have development in our UGAs that looks exactly like a city, but nobody else does. So this methodology that Commerce has come up with is not for us. It's primarily really for the Puget Sound area and probably applicable to Spokane County and Clark County. The rest of our smaller jurisdictions and smaller counties are going to really struggle with this, and we are going to need to tweak their methodology so that it reflects the fact that our UGAs are treated differently. But the problem that this model comes up with immediately for us is it assigns us a need to zone for housing that fundamentally the Growth Management Act says to us we cannot zone for unless if we have services to serve it. Now, we will be coming forward again with that rural housing update that we talked about with you. We think we can actually provide some of this more affordable housing, and we want to because we want people to be able to afford to live in rural areas. So you're going to see some ways that we think we can do some of this, but we're not going to be able to hit some of the numbers through that just capacity analysis because we can't zone for apartment complexes unless if we have sewer. And as you know, we don't have sewer in a lot of rural areas. So this puts us in a very difficult situation. We have expressed this. We're not silent about this. We've said this many times to Commerce. But as
Most counties, what are the ratios of city to county? Lewis County on the slide before looks to be about 50-50. That's why we're getting.
That's absolutely right. We already have probably over 40% of our population living outside of urban growth areas to begin with. So any growth is a big deal.
And other counties have what kind of percentages are we talking? 70% living in the cities, 80% living in the cities versus?
It would be very specific to this, to the county, because like if you're looking at Okanagan County, you're probably looking at a very sparse population. But the big counties, you're looking at most people living in cities.
Right.
Looking at the Sound counties, Spokane County, Clark County, people are living primarily in cities.
Mindy, what's the ramifications of not meeting these goals? What's
This
the
is
hammer?
this is something we are very concerned about, and Eric started alluding to this. Even though they say that you don't have to hit these numbers, you do need to zone for these numbers, and we can't in some ways hit these. We're going to be as creative as we can coming forward to you to try and see what we can do to get to hit some of this stuff. But the ramification is because these are adopted into our countywide planning policies and we are required to plan for them, counties may find themselves in a situation where we are brought into court for not meeting something that we are unable to meet. And so and again, we have pointed this out to Commerce, that we feel like we're being put in a position where we may end up in invalidity with our comp plan because we can't do something that they're telling us we need to do. And we will continue to express this concern. But at this point, we're pressing forward. We're going to show you what we think we can do as we move forward. And then let me also say, not only are we worried as the county about these numbers, but those smaller jurisdictions are pretty worried too. Because it is a situation where for them to zone for and provide some of this stuff, they don't have the adequate services for it. And then they have to plan for the adequate services because that's what you're required to do in your city comp plan, just like we are. And that is very hard to do when you don't have a tax base to do that off of. So our smaller jurisdictions are put in a hard place too. Be assured that we're trying to advocate here as well with this, but we're in a tough spot. So anyway, I wanted you to understand that necessarily we will need to make sure that we are not putting a lot of growth in truly rural areas, because these numbers are not something that we're going to be able to meet easily. So we need to artificially depress our growth rate, and we may need to look at ways to actually slow growth in the rural areas in order to drive it to cities, which is part of what the Growth Management Act wants to have happen anyway. So everybody feels sufficiently scared?
Well, this is Eric again. I wanted to say something to try to like lift the sense of despair.
Lift the fear.
Yeah. So I think these numbers are going to get better as we keep going through the process. So the good news is we've talked with the city of Centralia in anticipation of the Planned Growth Committee meeting, and they, as the largest urban jurisdiction, they believe that the housing numbers about their growth are grossly wrong, like too low, that they are going to easily meet and exceed the projection for how much growth they would take, and that they are prepared to take more growth. If that is true for Winlock and Chehalis as well, based on their existing growth that they know of from permitting, it's possible that the math will start getting better, because the cities will be saying, well, we're going to have more growth than this. And that means we'll give them more population. And since the county's population is sort of just like, a number meant to just be generally GMA compliant and get us within the OFM range. If the cities take more of the share of the population, the county share will necessarily come down. And that means that also that will be true for some of the smaller cities, and the numbers will get better for them. So I think it's important to not be so scared and to wait to see how the numbers start changing as those urban jurisdictions start saying, but we are actually planning on and prepared to take more growth than that.
Yes. Preston says, quit scaring us. Yes, I do agree. I think the numbers are going to get better as we go forward, which is going to be good. And I think we're going to tweak their methodology as long as we figure out a way to do it, which will help as well. As Barb was saying, it also will help as cities realize that they do need to annex. Getting the urban growth area into the city limits is actually pretty important. It helps across the board to have cities their city limits actually represent the city instead of
There's
those urban growth areas.
between Chehalis, Centralia, Napavine, and Winlock, their urban growth areas, it's almost like a constant strip of pseudo urban area that's where I would think a huge portion of the growth will occur. That's projected to be unincorporated area, but as that gets annexed, it wouldn't be.
Yeah. So we do hope, and there are some bills in the legislature right now that are intended to incentivize annexation. I've commented on a few of them because they're actually not ones that anything besides maybe Centralia could take advantage of to try and make sure our smaller jurisdictions can take advantage of those too. We'll see. I mean, legislation is great.
What kind of incentives are we talking about? Money for infrastructure? I mean,
Yeah, there's a sales tax one. There's some different options out there. So they're trying to figure out how to help jurisdictions pay for the fact that annexation can be expensive. So yeah, so we're looking at I'm looking at some of them. So is the county. Everybody's looking at the bills. So
Just because you mentioned sales tax, Minnie, this is Eric again. I want the commissioners to know, and anybody in the public on the line too, that's not a new sales tax. It's not like if you annex in, then the city imposes a new tax. It's a sales tax swap with the state. The state would basically give back the city a portion of the sales tax for a period of time after annexation so that the citizens pay the same tax rate, but the city gets more of the money to serve the new area. So that's why it's an incentive, right? Is that it's like, you're going to get more tax money without raising taxes on your citizens. So it's a pretty nice deal for those citizens.
yeah, thank you for that clarification. It's not new tax. Okay, let's look at the schedule really quick. Okay, so here we are in February. So we're not going to be sharing the final numbers with you on everything right away. We're hoping in March that we'll be able to share with you by the end of March the pretty close to final population allocations, but they'll probably still be tweaked a little bit. And we'll also be able to give you guys the preliminary housing for everybody at that point. Hopefully that's the goal. In April, we need the Planned Growth Committee to vote on the final population and housing allocations and to give them to you at the end of April. What that means is this is going to be a little bit different than what normally happens. So normally I give you guys final stuff and we have a workshop on it and then a hearing. What's going to probably happen here because of our schedule and needing to get this done, and I'll give you a few more reasons why we got to get it done pretty quickly. What's probably going to happen is I'm going to give you final preliminary numbers at a workshop. And then I'm going to give you a staff report before the hearing. That's the final. So you'll have the final numbers, but probably not at our normal 1 month ahead. It'll be at 2 weeks ahead. So it's just a little bit tighter than we normally do things. I don't like to do it that way, but the reason why is because we need you guys to have a hearing in May so that Board of County Commissioners can have a hearing in June to adopt this. And the reason why is because on July 1, all of us start periodic update. That is when we are all eligible for our money from commerce, our appropriation from commerce to start. And we only have 2 years, and we all need to be going on July 1. We all got to get going on July 1. So we need June for these numbers to get approved by Board of County Commissioners. Then it's fast. Don't freak too much about that one, because as we progress through periodic update, it is okay for us to go back and tweak numbers. So we could, get to the end of periodic update and cities learn things about their capital facilities plans. We learn things, and we actually end up making some adjustments to population, and then that would change housing allocations. So it's not like it's a dead stop in June that we can never look again, but we are going to push pretty quick through here. So just wanted to warn you guys about that.
Aren't you, and if my memory serves me correctly, the PGC, the Plan Growth Committee, is the mayors of every town and the chair of the Board of County Commissioners.
That's right.
Yeah, they're pretty qualified to give us something to look at, I'm guessing.
It will be well vetted before it gets to you guys.
Yeah.
For sure.
Mindy, is this tied to our state's allocation of funds for all the housing, all of this new, money that they're talking about for housing? Will you expect, if you do this zoning, that all of a sudden developers or builders will be scouting around to look for where they can put these? Will it stimulate housing? Is that your prediction?
Well, that's what they want to do, is stimulate. That's the hope, I believe. I mean, we've said a lot of not great things here. I think the intention of the state is good. I don't think that I think it is right that we want to stimulate more affordable housing for people. We all know we're in a huge housing crisis. We know that it's hard for people to afford housing here and everywhere in the state. I think the intention is to try and make more housing that is more affordable. As you can see in the way we're explaining it, we don't think it's pencils well, particularly for rural counties like ours and small jurisdictions. The way they're doing it, we're not happy with. But I think that's what they hope, is if we all have to make this zoning and we all remove the regulatory barriers out of the way, then people will go use state money and people will make the housing. It's the build it and they shall come, zone for it and they shall come. Different. So I think that's the hope. We'll see.
Okay.
I
Okay,
guess I would say, I took a little drive the other day and I drove through Napavine and I saw a heck of a nice apartment building going in. And all I could, as we've been talking, I think we need about 10 of those, but Napavine's figured it out. Whatever they're doing, I don't know what they're doing.
I think, in talking to the cities, these numbers get kind of scary, and we don't like to be any of us told what to do. But I think fundamentally, when you talk to each of the cities, they're well aware that they need housing that's more affordable for the people who live there. I don't, again, I think the base of all of this is correct, that we need to provide housing that's affordable to people. And I think the cities, each of them, even the smaller jurisdictions, want people to be able to live and work in their city. It's the how that becomes a challenge. So yeah, we need a lot more apartment complexes and duplexes, quadplexes, row houses, ADUs, all of it, all the more affordable options. Any more questions on this? We're going to switch to Packwood next. This is it for tonight on this one. I know this is a lot that I've thrown at you guys tonight. Okay, if you're just dying to do it, you can go onto Commerce's webpage and you can read the housing guidance. I don't know that you want to do that. It's not final, but you can. Okay. Switch gears. All right, let's talk about Packwood. So tonight, Preston and I are going to tag team Packwood. Dennis and Kim are also on Zoom. As you know, they are our designated representatives from the advisory committee. So if you have questions for them about advisory committee recommendations and stuff, we can ask them to pop on. Just for anybody who's listening, this is the second workshop on the Packwood Subarea Plan. The first one was January 10th, and that presentation is online. It's on YouTube if you missed it and you want to go look at it. Okay. So what we'll go over, we'll do really quickly high-level stuff again, get everybody back to what we're talking about because we just covered a lot. Switch your brain to this one. And then we're going to dive into the 3 topics that you asked to hear about. So last time you asked that we come back and talk more about land use, housing, and economic development. And then we'll close with some next steps. We're going to pause, of course, for questions, but you can just interrupt me as we go. One up from that one. I like my compass, but one up, one slide up. Yeah, back, sorry, up, back. I keep on thinking of, when you have a PDF open, you scroll down and up. I'm sorry, that's not helpful. Back one. So I wanted to just a reminder about why we're doing a sub-area plan for Packwood. So Packwood is growing. It's growing very quickly. Housing prices there up about 300%. So huge, huge increase in housing prices. There's also been a huge increase in development permits, about 27% over the last 3-year increase in development permits. That's new construction. It's a lot of new construction coming in. Tourism has increased 4 times since 2019. So it went, well, the visitor center went from about 2,000 to 8,000 people checking at the visitor center, which is about 1% of how many people actually show up in that town. So a lot of stuff is happening. The result of all of that, limited affordable housing that we were just talking about. There's pretty much no affordable housing in Packwood right now. A lot of pressure on Highway 12, potential impacts on drinking water, among other impacts. So this growth that's happening now has a lot of impacts to it. Now I'll go to my pretty compass. And all of that for Packwood is happening without a plan because they are not incorporated. They're not an actual town, so they don't have the plan for the future. There's no direction. And that's what this plan is about. It sets a direction. It says, where are we going? Back to this figure. So sub-area plans are optional under the comprehensive plan. Like the comp plan, they are just vision, goals, and policies. There's no implementation in the sub-area plan. Implementation is phase 2. That would be zoning map and development regulations. That's in the yellow over there. We're not there yet, so you're not going to see that. We're just in phase 1 at this point. All right, so I'm going to give you an analogy, I hope will help the difference between phase 1 and phase 2. And anybody who's listening and who's been to my meetings has already heard this because I use this one a lot, but I think it's a good one. Okay, let's say you are planning a trip. The very first thing you need to know is where you are going. You can't figure out how to get there or what to pack if you don't know where you were going. So if you're going to go down the street to your friend's house for dinner, you might walk and you're probably going to take, I don't know, a bottle of wine, maybe a coat, because you're going to come back a little cold afterwards, right? But if you're taking a trip to the beach for the weekend, you're going to drive, not walk, out to the beach for the weekend. And you're going to pack an overnight bag and some toiletries. If you're going to Alaska, I'd take a cruise myself if I'm going up to Alaska and I'm going to pack a coat. If you're going to Australia, you're probably going to fly. And if you're me, you're packing your scuba gear because I'm diving if I'm going to Australia. Phase 1, where are you going? Once you figure out where you're going, then you can ask, how do we get there? And what do we pack? We're in phase 1. Where are we going? Next slide. So the question is, where is Packwood headed on transportation? Where is Packwood headed on housing? Where is it headed on land use, economic development, public facilities? That's what we're asking with this. That's what goals and policies are. Where are we going? So again, phase 1 now, where we're headed. Phase 2, how do we get ourselves there? That will come next. It will come to you guys, right? You are also responsible for implementation. So you are going to see all that too. We just don't have it yet. Something I really want to be clear about for everybody is that this plan is not driving growth. Growth's occurring. It's already occurring. It's occurring fast and furious out there. What this plan tries to do is manage and direct growth. One of the main things that you're going to hear from the community, and Bob, you asked this, what are we going to hear? You're going to hear from the community that they want you to stop growth. That's one of the primary things we have heard and you're going to hear. Many people who are living there in Packwood, they don't want any more growth. They don't like the tourism overrunning their town. They don't like it and they want it to stop. What everybody really needs to understand is we can't stop development. People have the right to develop their property. They have the right to sell their property. They have the right to ask market value for their property. These are the rights we have under property rights. So we're not going to stop it. And I'm sorry to say the tourism thing, that's out of the bag. Everybody's very aware of Packwood and they're coming there. We can't stop what is currently happening. What we can do is direct it and manage it. And we can look at what the implications are of it and we can plan for addressing those implications. That's what we can do with a plan. Okay. This is the map of the sub-area plan boundary. So this is the area the vision, goals, and policies are all about. Those familiar with Packwood can see that High Valley and Timberline are not included in the plan area, but I want you to make sure that you understand that those people shop, they eat, they go to church, some of them work in Packwood. So what happens in this area is very important, and you're going to hear from people from High Valley and Timberline because this area is really important to them. I'm going to come back to the area in a minute and kind of give a little bit more explanation about why it's designed the way it is, but I'll skip that right now. So the plan covers a lot. It covers all those elements that we cover in the comp plan. And I want to stress again, this is a question about where we are headed on each of these issues. It's not about how we actually implement that. So each of these issues is covered in there from a goals and policy standpoint, and we will have to look at how in the next phase. Next slide. I'm going to let you look at a pretty picture while I read you the vision. In 20 years, Packwood is a vibrant small town that embraces its history, encourages unique local businesses, provides a diversity of affordable housing options, supports existing and new residents, preserves the natural environment, encourages tourism, and promotes community events. That's that humongous 20-year vision for Packwood. And what the goals and policies do is they further define each of those, right? So these get specific, right? So the vision is we're going to Alaska, in my analogy. That's the vision. The goal is, great, while I'm there, I'm going to see Denali, right? So that's the analogy. The goals and policies are the specific of where we're headed on things in there. Last time you guys asked us to focus on land use, housing, economic development. We're going to tag team those. And then at the end, if you want to ask questions about any of the other stuff in the plan, absolutely. All right, let's move on to land use. So let's start with existing conditions. This is the existing zoning map. Back in the early 2000s, Lewis County set the zoning in order to comply with Growth Management Act. Most of Packwood is small town mixed use. That's the pink, kind of salmony pink color on the map. What kind of development can occur in small town mixed use? Pretty much anything. So in all that pink area, you can have single family residential accessory dwelling units, duplexes, sporting goods stores, restaurants, grocery stores, fuel stations, hotels, motels, RV parks, small event centers, schools, doctor's office, churches, etc. That pink area, you can do pretty much anything. When there is sewer, which is coming to a portion of that, you can do multifamily housing. So as we just talked about multifamily housing, like true apartments, anything above a duplex too, like triplex, quadplex, needs sewer. So even if we didn't change a thing, the minute sewer's there, then multifamily can go in that area. And so the reason why I keep bringing this up is this is why Packwood has experienced a lot of growth. We have a zone applied to most of Packwood that allows pretty much anything to happen. And what constrains it is water and sewer, not the zoning. So it's just important to keep in mind. That's why we're seeing so much growth out there, is the current zoning that we see out there is a lot of it. Okay, let's look at the theory of going forward. Next slide. The general approach that the Community Advisory Committee took with land
Mindy,
use-
this is Bob, Mindy.
Yeah.
Can you flip back to that map?
Yeah.
Isn't a lot of the growth in Packwood happening out in up north up there that isn't going to be affected by this small town mixed use anyway?
There is a lot of development that's also going up in particularly the High Valley area, because there's some large lots up there that are zoned the purple, which I forget which the purple is. That's RCC1. So those are 1 acre lots. So we are seeing development up there as well. So yeah, there's stuff going on all over the place here. And we've had a number of subdivisions in that pink area recently, and those will likely be short-term rentals when they come in, because that is the highest value use right now.
I guess the point it seemed like you were trying to say that if we do something here, we'll slow this down. It doesn't matter because that upper area still is going to
We're-
do what they're going to do, right?
We're not going to slow down growth.
Right.
So I just want to keep being clear about this. The existing zoning allows a lot of growth. We're not slowing it down. We can manage it. We can direct it. We can't
And-
stop it.
And as you pointed out, if you put water in there, it's going to happen anyway, or excuse me, wherever that sewer goes.
That's right.
That land is all of a sudden going to be really expensive. So if you don't do any zoning changes at all, it's still going to happen wherever you put the sewer.
That's right. Yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make, is the growth is going to occur, period. What we're going to try and do here, and what I'll explain, is we're going to try and direct it and manage it. Okay.
So what area are you talking about that's the 1 acre?
The dark purple,
Bob
the
was-
very top. So you see up at the very top of the map, there's that
Oh,
really,
okay,
really dark
okay.
purple. That's the beginning of the High Valley neighborhoods. So there's High Valley 1, 2, 3, 4 through 8. Gretchen, correct me. Is it 8 High Valleys neighborhoods?
And
10?
11.
11. Okay, thank you. I was like, Gretchen will know how many are out there. Yeah, so there's a bunch of neighborhoods. So that's the beginning of that zoning up in that area. And that's a residential zoning. And there are some big acres out there that can develop. Again, the constraints around development in those areas is primarily on-site well and septic for those, and then any critical areas that you run into, floodplain, steep slopes, stuff like that. Okay, so let's look at the plan. Next slide there. So advisory committee took the approach that highest density of development and the most intense uses should be at the center. And as you move out from the center, you get less dense and less intense uses. So this is a very basic, pretty much how all cities develop, right? You have a downtown that's pretty intense and pretty dense, and you get less as you move out. So an example of dense and intense, commercial uses that generate a lot of traffic, like a grocery store, are a very intense use. They have a lot of impact, especially on the neighbors around it and on the transportation infrastructure. Breweries, coffee shops, multifamily apartment complexes are dense and intense. They belong in the middle or near the middle, right? High density residential, row houses, tiny home villages, those kind of houses should go in that middle area. Commercial, sure, should be scaled because now you're in a more of a residential and less commercial type of space. Low density then, as you move out to that outer area, now you're looking at single family duplex ADU type of development only, and home-based business, not traffic generating, right? That's kind of the general approach that the advisory committee took. Again, this is super basic the way cities develop pretty much anyway. Right? They pretty much are on a corridor, and that's where your intensity goes, and it gets, right? So this is not some sort of wild idea. This is very, very common. The other important part about this, besides it just does it this way, typically is that you want most people living close to their services. You want that middle area to be where the doctor's office is and the post office and the grocery store. And you want more people living there so that they can easily access all that stuff. They can walk if they want to. They don't have to drive miles to get into those services. So there's a benefit to having the intensity tight in that area. It reduces traffic issues overall because people in those tight spaces do tend to make choices that don't include their car more often. And then on the outskirts, nobody in the outskirts wants a brewery next door. They just don't, right? They don't want the noise next door to them. They want their nice quiet space out there. So it works out for the people who are choosing to live in different spaces. So let's look at how this looks for Packwood. This is a concept. This is not a zoning map, but this is what that concept looks like when you apply it to Packwood. So the advisory committee recommends the high intensity commercial uses and the multifamily residential should be at the center around Highway 12. That's the red. But what they also say is that the commercial development in the red area should be sized to be similar to the existing development. That is the historic area of downtown. Those are smaller buildings. Blanton's grocery store is probably the largest at 11,000 square feet, which is a small grocery store. So they've said, yeah, commercial goes there and it should be intense like grocery stores. But they also said larger scale, if it comes to Packwood, belongs in the gray. So anything that's larger scale that doesn't fit in the scale of downtown Packwood belongs in the gray from a commercial use intensity standpoint. So it's still near Highway 12, but is not blowing up the character of that downtown corridor. The dark purple areas, there's two purples. The dark purple area, that's the middle of the bullseye. It's still in the middle of that bullseye. It should be high density residential, but a little limited on the commercial. So stop, like commercial, but a little less commercial as you move out in those purple areas. The light purple should be medium density residential. And again, we need to start scaling down commercial at that point. The pink areas should be that lower density, so single family duplex ADU, and not have traffic generating commercial, just home-based business. So both in the light, sorry, I already said that, I want to reiterate it. Both in the light purple and the pink home-based businesses would still be allowed. And the other clarification I don't think I've said yet, but I want to be really clear. This is about new development. It's not about existing development. Nobody has to pick up and leave because we said, hey, this is supposed to be high density residential. Sorry about your single family. No, your house can stay. It can be maintained. It can be replaced in its current footprint. This is about new development coming in. Let's see, we're going to dive in a little bit further here. So let's do a comparison between the two. So the big change between today and the future is about commercial and where traffic generating commercial can go. Right now, technically, traffic generating commercial can go in that left map anywhere in the pink at all, technically. Yes, it has constraints, right? You've got a water constraint and a septic constraint, but it can technically go anywhere. The plan on the right is to consolidate traffic generating commercial to the red and the gray. Put it at the center. So think that bullseye, right? High intensity, close to Highway 12, keep the intensity there, and then slow it down as it moves out to the outskirts. Preserve the low density residential further out without traffic generating commercial. That's really the big change of land use, pretty much the only big change. And I'll talk about housing in a second, because it's not really changing very much. The change is around commercial. It's consolidating commercial, pulling it into the center. When we get to economic development, Preston's going to give you some reason why that's super good for the economy of the town. Any questions about that before I hit housing and why it's not really changing? Okay. It would appear, oh wait, I'm sorry, stay there for just a sec. Yeah, it would appear that we're changing a whole bunch around housing, but we're not really. Because right now, technically you can do multifamily anywhere, but you can't because there's not sewer. Sewer, we don't know the map of where sewer is going to go yet. That will come, but it's likely pretty much the red, maybe not all the red, maybe a little bit of the gray, but it's pretty much the red. So it's appropriate to say, that's where multifamily is going to go because that's where multifamily is going to be able to go in the future because that's where sewer is going to be in the future. So it really isn't a big change there. You can't do more than a duplex outside of that. So pretty much those rest of the areas at this point, you really can't do more than a duplex. We do have other things that we want to bring forward to talk to you about during implementation, about other things that could be allowed, but the primary change here is really, really about commercial and driving commercial into a centered area. Okay.
Give me an example of what give me two or three things that you think would go in there.
Grocery store, brewery, coffee shop.
Oh, okay.
Those are all high
Commercial.
intensity commercial use.
Okay, and why is that different than the part in the red?
No, that's the part in the red.
Oh, in the part in the red. Oh, okay, so you're just, okay, excuse me.
The
Yeah.
gray, so the
I was
difference,
thinking of the gray.
yeah, so the difference between the red and the gray would be scale. So when we implement this, when we write code, the desire of the plan is that the red is scaled. So if it's another grocery store, it shouldn't be bigger than Blanton's.
Okay. So what
If
I
something
meant is in the
big
gray.
goes, yeah, the gray, if something big were to come to Packwood, it belongs in the gray.
Okay, but that's what I mean, like what? What, like,
Well, there's big grocery stores and small grocery stores.
oh, you mean like a Walmart or something?
Well, Walmart probably isn't ever going to go here, but
Yeah.
if there were something bigger that wanted to go there, like a normal Ace Hardware is not as small as the one in Packwood,
Okay,
right? A pharmacy, like a Rite Aid, is not typically as small as what we have in the downtown area of
Okay.
Packwood. So those larger scale things that could and potentially end up in Packwood, the desire is to put them in the gray area, not the
But-
red.
but
Mindy,
did I hear you right that you said the sewer may or may not go there?
It may or may not include portions of the gray.
So now, I mean, eventually
It
would,
could be
because
expanded
who's
in the
gonna put a
future.
big thing like that without a sewer?
They certainly could pay for sewer extension. Usually sewer is paid for by private developers,
Okay. Okay,
not
gotcha.
by counties. We're doing, the sewer that we're doing is for water quality reasons.
I know that in that red area, you had a proposed limit on footprint for new development. Was that?
It's just a scaled idea, so we don't really have a footprint code limit that is
Okay.
being proposed yet, since we're not to implementation. The desire is that the structures would not be larger than the existing stuff there, that it would be scaled to fit. So what we would do in implementation is we would write that requirement in, right? So you create envelopes within which development can occur. So if something bigger wanted to come in, it would not be allowed in that downtown area, because what we've heard from the community is they want that to feel like a small town downtown area, and it could be blown up by a Rite Aid, right? Right. So a Rite Aid, if it comes, again, would be better suited to go to the gray. That's what this plan is saying.
Or like
I-
a sportsman's warehouse or something could go in the gray, but not the red.
My question, maybe I'm the only one that misses this. Are we talking the red on the right or the red on the left? I think I'm sorting it out when you guys are saying, but in my head, there's a lot of red on the left picture and there's red on the right. And the distinctions we're making, we keep saying red and we're trying to make the distinction about the red.
Bob,
So-
the one on the left is rose.
Thank you.
There's a
What I
difference
would say is,
between
I think
rose and
I think
red.
I've been following what you've been saying.
Lemon.
But
It's
when water,
coral peony.
I didn't realize I pushed it. So let me reiterate, because can be terribly confusing. What we've been talking about is the future map, which is the map on the right. Today, the map on the left, the existing map, commercial can go anywhere in that pinky rose color. And the idea from the plan is to consolidate commercial in the right-hand side to the red, scaled to the appropriate size of the existing structures, or the gray where larger commercial would be allowed.
where do you think the water is going to go on the left picture? Did I hear you say you think the water in the future will be throughout the red or the rose of the left picture?
Right picture. So the picture on the right is the picture with the future, right? I just want to make sure that we're clear. We're looking, the future is the right map. And what I can say about sewer is it will likely include most of the red. It might include some of the gray. It could include maybe some of that dark purple. We're not sure yet because we don't really have that plan. We're not really sure, but it's going to be consolidated to the Highway 12 area, mostly the downtown space. Which is why I say the housing doesn't really change because that's the only area that's going to be allowed to do multifamily anyway.
Hey, Mindy, what if we decide to go forward with the sub-area plan, but then when you get to phase 2 where you're actually deciding on what we're talking about tonight, that somebody doesn't, it doesn't pass or.
So the way that these comprehensive plan works is once you've decided on the policies and goals and the concepts, you must implement them. So
Okay.
there will be nuance on nuance that we can
Okay.
debate of how you implement it, but we do have to implement this through code.
Okay, so tonight we're trying to decide, do we want to think about implementing this at some point in the future? Not tonight, but at some
Not
point in
tonight.
the future, but it is going to be implemented. It may not look just like this because somehow it might get changed, but it's going to have to be done.
Right. So
Okay.
the advisory committee and all of our public meetings have led to this is what the community is recommending you approve for
Okay.
Packwood as the policies, the goals, the concepts going forward, which then we will need to implement.
Okay.
And I know you asked me this last time, is staff proposing this? No, this is the community's plan. This is the advisory committee's plan. I have facilitated the conversations, but I didn't write this. Right? I mean, I literally wrote it. I literally put all the pen to paper, but they are the ones who developed this. And so that public, if you want to see the process, that public participation plan, which is linked to this plan, gives you that whole year-long process of how they got here. It has all the hand-drawn zoning maps that started before this, that then went into like 5 draft maps that look like this, that went into like 2 more versions. So the advisory committee vetted this.
And I thought the community members that came and represented this last time, were very capable too.
Yeah, we had a
give
great,
input on this.
yeah.
But I wonder, did they draw on any other like more expertise input from people that do this for a living?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So we had an entire technical advisory group as well who reviewed a lot of this information for us to red flag anything and provide anything else. The guidance that I provided is when we started to run into something that the Growth Management Act would not allow.
Okay.
Right? When we started to hit something where it's like, yeah, we can't do that
Yeah.
because that's not legal. So I did that, a lot of those kind of things. Our advisory committee was great. I would recommend you go back and look at those bios. We had a lot of expertise
you
in that
did.
room.
Yeah.
Really smart people that we worked with on this. And then we also had, as you remember, 3 forums, community forums on housing. We did 3 public surveys. We had 2 other community meetings. So all of that also comes into this. So this is really a community. I'm not saying that the community loves 100% of it, but this is a community-driven plan, not staff-driven.
Okay. So I have a question, and that is, with the community as it exists right now, and the community members that are coming forth on this, do they have they submitted concerns about the water quality that is ongoing? Because as you mentioned before, the last meeting I was at, that, sewers are failing and water quality, et cetera, but some of these people will not be on city water.
On sewer.
Right? Are they concerned about their own quality of water because all these people coming in?
Absolutely. So we have discussed, there's a lot of concern about the aquifer. Packwood has, I am biased. I'll just say right now, Packwood has the best water ever. I've never had better water than Packwood. It is amazing. When you're out there on the 14th, have the water. It is good. It is an amazing aquifer. There is considerable concern about the aquifer there. The reason why we received a state appropriation is related to protecting that aquifer. And I can show you guys later, but this is all in the water service area already. Not everybody's hooked up. I'm sorry, not all this. Everything in the plan boundary on the east side of the Cowlitz River is in the water service area from Lewis County Water District 3. They are not all hooked up to it because there's not a mandatory hookup requirement, but it is there. And there's 230 plus additional hookups available before they need to do expansions. All of that is outlined in your existing conditions report if you want to read through that. So people can come off their own wells and hook up to the system if they would like to. And as new development comes in, they are hooking up to the system. Overall, long-term, that's going to be the best thing out in Packwood is get people onto water. And as we can expand sewer, which is very expensive, get people off their septic systems. Yep. Yeah. Long goal.
And Kathy, I actually spoke with somebody that is knowledgeable from Packwood today that was in the septic business. And he explained it, I thought, really well. He told me that it's not that the sewers are failing, it's that the soil is so
It is
wonderful that it allows everything to go down into the water.
Yeah.
So the sewers are fabulous. Nobody wants to get rid of them, but they're not actually effective.
They're not. So a
Yeah.
lot of it, particularly in that really tight downtown area of Packwood, a lot of the septic systems went in before our newer regulations around septic systems, and the soil is amazing out. I mean, this is the riverbed of the Cowlitz River. It's just like stone. Again, I can personally attest to it because I tried to dig some post holes. It's very hard. So yeah, it's really hard to treat septic out there. Some of the failing systems that we're seeing actually more are towards High Valley. I think the concern about failing systems right in that tight knit downtown area is that those lots are so small. If they do fail, they can't meet regulations to put in new systems. And so it's going to be important that they have the option to hook up to septic or to sewer instead of being on septic. So that's another reason why we focus on that space down there too.
I just have one quick question since you were talking about the zoning. I'm just curious. I love the little, my favorite is the West Side Co-op up in Olympia in the neighborhood. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
I'm not. No.
did they ever think of anything that would be possible in the future to allow those type of little things, like little co-ops in the neighborhood where people have their little community grocery stores or,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
back to the old days, how, you know, you used to have little grocery stores in the neighborhood. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So primarily what we've heard from pretty much unanimously across the board is the people, the further out you move, the less they want anything.
Right.
And the
I'm
more they
sure,
want to
yeah.
stay rural, they want their lots to be bigger. They don't want to have any type of impacts. They don't want to have any kind of change. So we really only looked at home-based business when you're moving into that lighter pink on the map on the right. Home-based business is like you're a CPA out of your home,
yeah.
right? Or an
Yeah.
architect out of your home, or, you know, it's things where you're not generating traffic. People aren't coming and going from your house, but you do have a business there.
Mhm.
So home-based business would still be allowed, but primarily people, you know, this Packwood is not at the point where they want to see any kind of stuff
In their neighborhood.
moving out
Yeah.
into their neighborhoods for the
Yeah.
most part. They really please don't. It's
Right.
kind of the thing you're going to, that's a theme you're going to hear a lot. It's
Yeah.
please don't develop anymore. Yeah.
Okay, moving forward.
Frank's got a question.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and then we'll.
So looking at the future map, I see in the key, the future land use designations, the one for open space is
Yeah.
white with the green X's through it. I see that there's one place where that actually applies, or does it also apply to the red areas with the green X's through it?
Yep, it applies to, yeah, so it's a green hatching and it's also over some red areas. Those red areas represent existing parks, museum, the museum field behind the museum. And then the area that's on kind of that little north notch of red that's got the green hatch over it, that is the critical areas of Packwood Station. So it's not really a
Okay,
developable
so it's
space.
not really mixed use open space. I
Nope.
mean, to me, it was like a oxymoron.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yep. One more thing I want to say about this map, and then I want to move a little bit more into a few more housing things. So I haven't talked about the area on the west side of the Cowlitz River. So in the future map, that's blue. What you need to think of this as a reserve. So what the advisory committee is saying is if in the next 20 years, Packwood gets to the point that it needs to have another area that develops at a higher density than 5 acres, that's where it goes. And the reason why they chose that is because it's located between Packwood and High Valley. So again, if you look at the map on the left, the dark purple at the north, that's High Valley. Most of the lots there are 12,000 square foot lots, so quarter acre lots, but it's zoned for 1 acre. What the advisory committee is saying is that hold that space as a reserve, leave it big 5 acre stuff as it is, 5 and 10 acre as it is now, but that's where development would go next if it's needed. Fill in the space between Packwood and High Valley. So it's a reserve.
Will the state allow you to expand into that area?
There are definitely ways that we can do it, but it is a future discussion,
Oh,
not a
okay.
now.
That's
We
what I
are
was
not
thinking.
there now. So that's why I say, think of it as a reserve. This is a area to grow later. Okay, let's talk a little bit more. Yes, a beautiful reserved Cabernet. I could use that right now. Okay, let's move on to the next slide here. All right. I know, no wine sippy cups tonight. So at the last meeting, you guys asked me, how do we create affordable housing? I am going to say back to you, that is the biggest question before the state right now. And if y'all have a good answer, they want to hear from you. We don't know. We're trying really hard. That we just talked about, like, we're hoping that something's going to happen here. This is not an easy thing that we're in. The 3 basic ways to deal with affordable housing: 1, you subsidize it, right? So you either, the jurisdiction pays for housing at below market rate, or there are grants that are given to nonprofits to provide housing below market rate. When I say grants, that's taxpayer money. So just be clear, this is not free money. When you subsidize something, you are taking taxpayer dollars to put in housing below market rate. That's one way. That will need to happen everywhere in the state. That is part of the answer. 2, you can do rent control. So the government can put rent control to suppress what you charge. There's a bill right now about rent control at the state. It wouldn't impact us anyway, but I don't think so. Last time I looked at it, I don't think it would impact us. Pretty sure Lewis County does not want to consider rent control, however. That's not a very popular approach to affordable housing. The 3rd is you figure out how to incentivize people to build more housing. Housing, at the end of the day, is very much a supply and demand, right? Right now, we have very little supply and very high demand. That will always drive the price up every time. Saturate the market with more housing, you can stabilize prices, right? Those are the 3 ways I know how to get at this issue in general. Eric, chime in.
Yeah, I wanted to just add a little bit more nuance on the supply versus demand thing, because it's not merely about adding more units. I mean, adding more units I think is helpful, but I think you also should be considering the type of units that get added. So enabling units that are lower cost units can help make prices come down, not only because those units are lower cost, but because people in higher cost units who are looking to downsize or to cheapen the amount they pay for housing can move into the lower cost units, freeing up the higher cost units for people who would, be more well suited to them. And that can cause even higher cost units to come down in price as you right size people's needs across the community. And then finally, I want to add in the idea of time. I think those of you in the development world would say, well, development costs are such that I'm never going to be able to create a unit that's cheap enough for some of these populations. And I think that's true. But don't forget that even if you were to create something at market rate today and it's more expensive, it'll get older over time. And if we build enough housing now, when those units are older, if new housing is also being built then, the new units being built then will be more expensive, but the units that have gotten older will be getting comparatively less expensive. And then it's possible, again, that you'll end up with a diverse array of housing prices because some units will be older and less desirable, and still in good enough shape to support people living in them, right? And that's a way you can, that's actually a healthy part of the housing market, is that the older, less desirable units are cheaper, and that's useful for those people who need cheaper units.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. So our plan, this plan that you have in front of you, the Subarea plan, focuses on number 3. That's where the focus is on this, right? So is subsidy part of the answer? Yes. And you're going to hear a lot more about that kind of stuff as we move into comp plan update and so forth. But the plan here focuses on that. How do you incentivize more housing, right? And as Eric said, how do you incentivize more housing that's more affordable? That's where the focus is of this. So let's move to the next slide. I want to define affordable really quick. Affordable means that you spend 30% of your income, no more than 30% of your income, on your mortgage or your rent. That's what affordable housing means. So something that's affordable to somebody who's making minimum wage, very, very different than something that's affordable to somebody making $60,000 a year or $100,000 a year, right? So affordable housing is not a number, it's a range, right? And you just have to keep that in mind. So a lot of times when people say affordable housing, they instantly think that lowest income bracket, right? That 0 to 30 or below 50%. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a range of housing that needs to be affordable. The primary goal of the Packwood plan states that Packwood should have a range of housing options that are affordable at all incomes. That's what the goal is. So 20 years from now, the goal is to have a Packwood that has enough diversity of housing that someone making minimum wage can find housing. Someone making 60,000 can find housing, right? That is absolutely not the case right now. There's virtually no long-term rentals in Packwood at all, right? It is not affordable. Okay, let's move. And I should also say, it's not just the minimum wage is definitely priced out in Packwood, because there's that, we've seen like a 300% increase in the sale prices of housing. Middle income people are pretty much out of that market too. So this isn't just the lowest end kind of question. Packwood needs affordable housing, low to middle. I mean, at this point, it's really upper income that can afford housing at this point in Packwood, unless you are already there. And those people who are already there on fixed incomes, they're in a serious situation too, because they're getting priced right out of it too. So there's a big crisis of housing in Packwood.
Can I also add a piece to that, Mindy?
Please do.
It's because tourism has increased so much, and our economy is now a service industry economy, pretty much. Most people that are working in Packwood are in this minimum wage range. So it used to be, you used to be able to live there, live your simple life, work your simple job, have your simple house. But now those jobs are more and more, they're plentiful. In fact, you can hardly find anyone to fill those positions. It's not like there's a lack of work, but we're in this like pretty awful cycle of needing that level of work. And I will tell you all right now, I'm a barista by day. Like I am in this category. There's no way if I didn't own something right now, I would be able to live in Packwood. And one of my coworkers is about to lose her life here because her rental is being sold. But it's not just, it's also it's our economy as well. I guess is what I'm trying to get at, is that if we're gonna like put all of our eggs into this tourism basket and like provide more and more housing for tourists to stay, encouraging more and more tourists to come, we're going to need more and more of that level of job. And so we're definitely going to need more and more of that level of house. And I think it's too bad that we talk about affordability as being a tiny home. Like I would like a family to be able to live in a normal sized home, not be restricted to an apartment or a tiny house or you know, just because they're working it. I don't know. I believe me, I have a lot to say and I'll try to plug it in at the appropriate times tonight, but anyway, I'll leave it at that for now. Just saying that a lot of the jobs that are available in Packwood are that lower end, and it's not because we're not hard workers or we don't have college degrees or whatever. We chose to live in this place because it's a simple, because we like it up there, and it's becoming harder and harder to do that. So I don't know. For
No,
now.
Thank you. And please, Gretchen, please feel free to chime in. Because you live out there, you have unique experience, and not just that she lives out there now, she grew up there. So she has a lot of unique experience about Packwood that she can bring. We have a number of the advisory committee members in that same position too. So, yeah. All right, let's move on to the next. It's a big deal. Let's move on to the next slide. It's a very big deal out there. So let's look back at this. When you are looking, unfortunately, it is simply true that when you are looking at lower wage earners, single family residential is not affordable, and it's not going to likely be affordable, mostly because the price of land is high and the price to build those buildings is high. So what is more affordable are more of your multifamily options. Because you're spreading the cost of the land and the cost of the building materials and all of that onto the shoulders of more people. So the price comes down. This is not to say that I don't agree with Gretchen. I would love it if everybody could afford to live in a single family house, but the reality of that right now is that that is really not possible anywhere in our state if you are in a lower income bracket, unless if you are renting something that is an older structure. Once we have sewer in Packwood, multifamily housing can be built. And again, the plan is really saying that where the sewer is going to go is where multifamily should be considered, right? That's the bullseye. Also, in the purple areas, the suggestion is to focus on middle housing options. Middle housing is duplex, triplex, quadplex, row houses. Tiny home villages fall into that. Hostels, dormitories fall into that as well. So we do have some seasonal workers that come through where that might be a good option for them in there. So the idea is that in the purple areas, those middle housing should be allowed. So again, this is about new housing, should be allowed in those spaces. In the pink, traditional single family should be allowed. Those are the larger lot areas too. However, duplexes and ADUs should continue to be allowed in the pink. So we usually think of duplex and ADU and single family all as the same type of thing. So you could have a single family house with a detached or attached ADU, or a duplex, that kind of housing, or just single family. So again, just the housing isn't as much of a change here. It's more of just acknowledging that where multifamily is likely to be able to be built anyway is that red area and some of that, maybe some of the dark purple space. And so it's more of a right sizing of that in there. That's what I have to say about housing. We're going to move on to economic development. Let Preston talk.
Mindy,
Yeah.
can I, so in your, what's the planning commission's, what are we recommending? What are we not recommending sheet that you gave us to look at? You said that we could, if we do have the permission to suggest edits or changes to the policies and goals. When would be an appropriate time to talk about that?
I would ask, I mean, not that you can't introduce it now, if you have concerns and things that you're going to want to talk about. My recommendation would be to have that serious conversation during deliberations, which means wait until you hear testimony. I think the testimony will help some people shape maybe the way you might want to make changes to this. So I would recommend waiting until then. I'm not saying that you can't bring up, if you have something right now that you think is weighing heavily on your mind and you'd like to share it right now, that's perfectly fine. We're not in a quasi judicial thing, so we're a little more free to just speak.
I actually do, believe it or not, have something. I'll keep it simple and short. With the housing in the sub-area plan, you have one goal, and it's to provide affordable housing for the community. lofty, very broad, very general, definitely needs to be in there. But something that I've been thinking a lot about is single family housing is exactly the kind of development that's happening right now. It's really actually not commercial at all. In fact, we have empty lots and empty commercial space in downtown Packwood. That's not what people are concerned about. The concern is that more and more houses upon houses upon houses are being built in Packwood. The problem is that they're not being built with residents in mind. They're being built for visitors to come visit and be tourists in Packwood. And so until there's a distinction between those two types of housing, I think we're always going to slip through the cracks, because we're always going to say, oh, look, we're building housing, we're increasing supply. But the problem is it's not the right kind. It's not helping the people that actually live there. So I do think that as a goal, it would, for the town, I think it would be really, if somebody could help with the language of that, to find that balance between providing not just housing for housing's sake. Housing on paper is different than housing for what it's actually being used for. So if we can work on, as a community, finding that balance between tourist housing and residential, like full-time residential housing for the people that live and pay taxes and vote in Lewis County, we're running, I mean, it's not for a lack of perk holes and foundations being poured in Packwood. I mean, they're on every corner and in every neighborhood that's happening. It's just not helping. So I would love to see something like that acknowledged in this plan, that there is some sort of thought behind the kind of residential housing that we're permitting, that we're allowing to be built in this town.
Frank, you have
That's all
something to say
I have
about that?
Yeah, Gretchen or Mindy, feel free to weigh in, but can't short-term rentals be considered a business, and that we, somehow have a mechanism to control the number of, businesses of a type in an area, so that, so that we can help address some of the things that Gretchen mentions. If we're not able to control the number of short-term rentals, then, it almost sounds like there's nothing we can do, that we're subject to, the homeowners that want to use their properties as short-term rentals. And, you can't tell me what to do with my property. I understand, property rights, but, if short-term rentals had to be considered a business, then they would have to get a permit to operate and meet certain standards and so forth. And you could deny permits, based on, any number of criteria that are legal, such as, well, it's not clean enough, or it's not whatever enough that's, meets, a certain preset criteria. Can we put a number of short-term rentals in an area?
Yes. So yes, it is
Okay.
possible to do all of those levels of regulation. I do want to just reiterate, and then I thought I'm not sure if Dennis wanted to reply from the advisory committee standpoint, but the advisory committee did discuss short-term rentals. They decided to let it pretty much go back to a county-wide discussion. That does not in any way, shape, or form mean that you guys couldn't decide, based on the testimony and based on your own experience with Packwood, as Gretchen has said, to put in a goal and policies related to short-term rentals, which would then be implemented in the future these are implementation ideas that you're putting forward. So if this is something that, as we get to the testimony and we move into deliberations, that you feel really compelled that this is important to do, staff will absolutely help you put that together. And I would like to let Dennis answer a little bit, and then I think Jason has something to say. Dennis, you're on mute.
Yep. Thank you. I was hitting the wrong unmute button. Thank you. I appreciate you allowing me to speak tonight. regarding the short-term housing that Commissioner Corbin was just discussing, the CAC has had considerable input and discussions and frustrations and concerns over the amount and the location of the short-term housing that's being developed and has been developed here in Packwood. It has been converted, existing homes that have been converted to short-term housing. Addressing Gretchen's concerns, that's where all of our long-term housing, our affordable housing went. The people realized there was a bigger buck at the end of the weekend, and they converted their existing dwellings, and they're building new dwellings to accommodate short-term housing. And that's where a lot of our workers are losing their ability to rent a viable place here in town. Supply and demand. As Mindy was mentioning, this whole thing regarding housing and supply and demand, and the sub-area plan and location for the higher density housings to satisfy the supply and demand needs around the urban core, is paramount in the CAC's mind. The affordable housing, how are we going to do it? I've got one word that I've been touting for years as an architect: density. The more dwellings you can build per acre, the lower the cost is going to come down. Whether it's 2 residences per acre, 4 residences, a 8-plex multifamily building, the costs of construction are going to come down there, and the ultimate rents are going to come down, and the builder is going to still make his needed profit margin. So it's all hand in hand, and it all goes together, and it all starts with the comp plan and providing the proper densities and the proper zonings in the proper locations. Thank you.
But would we not increase the available supply if we found an appropriate way to reduce the number of short-term rentals?
Yeah, so it can be a combination of both. So I think this is a good conversation for you guys to continue to have. I do suspect you're going to hear testimony on this particular topic as well. At the end of the presentation, I'll give you a rundown of what I think you're going to hear. You're going to hear about this one.
Okay.
So I think there's no reason why we can't talk about it now, but if you want to start formulating your thoughts more and more and more, when we get into deliberations, we can really start vetting this out together and figure out how to put in goals and policies. Jason's got his hand raised too online.
Yeah, on the short-term rental situation, what prevents us from classifying a short-term rental as a hotel and confining it to certain areas where you could only put a hotel?
You absolutely can you can classify it as transient accommodations. Transient accommodations are anything that is for rent for a fee under 30 days.
Right.
And so that is a definition. And yes, we can zone to exclude those. We can also put other limitations on it. So there are a lot of implementation measures. At this point, though, I think what we need to just focus on is what goal and policy are appropriate. And then we will work on with you implementation as well. So I'm not saying you won't get, you're saying that.
Well, I think that it would make sense to have a goal then, at least, let's keep it on the front burner, commissioners, and let's, make it a goal to try to find ways to appropriately reduce short-term rentals. I think that as a goal, then we can work on implementation later, like Mindy says.
It's obviously it's a complex issue, but it's kind of what came first, the chicken or the egg, because if you put in the sewer, it's expensive. Then you're going to drive the commercial area to start build up. They need somebody to come and buy their wares. And then if you don't have any place for these people to stay, which is where they're staying now, is in the short-term rentals, they may not want to come to stay in a hotel. They're looking for a certain
Feel.
yes.
Yeah.
And so now you've got all this, you've got a place for all the employees to live, but you have no customers. So you kind of have to remember that it's kind of a symbiotic relationship you've got the people there already that are buying the homes. They are buying them using the mechanisms of rental and whatnot to be able to afford them. And they don't want to rent them to a full-time rental because they want to come use them themselves. So that's something that's happened, and it's happened all over the nation, probably all over the world. But you're not going to really change that. But you could legislate it that
Right.
you keep some homes just for rentals. But you know, it's like who gets the short straw?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about is an appropriate level of, trying to reduce short-term rentals. Long-term rentals, no, I'm not even talking about that. But the short-term 30-day or less, like Jason was alluding to, classify them as a hotel, maybe zone them, in a particular area. I mean, I don't know. I think we talk about building more and more and more and more, but that's only part of the equation. If we build more and more and more, more and more and more are going to become more short-term rentals. So, we've got to try to, work it from both ends, increase the supply of building, yes, but then reduce the demand for short-term rental. It doesn't mean eliminate it. It just means to try to put a limit on it so that we don't go into a completely short-term rental community, because that's not what the community wants, it sounds like. So a solution would be, how do we reduce short-term rentals?
The other, just a small part of that equation, anytime you reduce anything, you push the price up, supply and demand. So if you reduce the supply of short-term rentals, the homes that are short-term rentals, the value is going to go up, and grandma's house evaluation is going to go up as well. So there, there's consequences. to
There
doing this.
there are. That's why I say appropriate, but
It's a big conversation.
but if, are we talking reducing the availability of short-term rentals, increasing the cost of short-term rentals? Well, that's borne by people that are coming in from out of town. That wouldn't affect grandma living down the
It
street.
would only affect because they're going to sell the short-term rental, and it's instead of 500,000, it's going to be $1.2 million. And now grandma's
Oh,
house
gotcha.
is going to
Okay.
be.
So, sorry,
reappraised.
I'm going to bring us back for a second. Not because this isn't important. I think this is highly important. I don't think, Jason, you finished all of what you were going to say. I think you got truncated, and then Barb would like to
I'm
chime in.
Terribly sorry.
No, it's okay. This is really important. And I think this is going to be probably one of our hottest issues. So it's totally fine. But I think, Jason, let's let you finish what you're going to say. And then Barb would like to make a couple legal comments.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily suggesting that we reduce anything, but if there was a way to just classify it and then zone it where it's confined to certain areas that are amenable to the, to the citizenry, and that it still works as a short-term rental, and it still works with the feel and the amenities that they're looking for. You could have more short-term rentals and it still work as long as it's in the right spots.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is definitely part of what we want to talk about. Barb, did you want to chime in with a couple legal comments?
I just wanted to come in with a couple of definitions. At the state level, transient accommodations are regulated. And another aspect of this that I think is really important that I haven't heard anybody mention yet is that we're also talking about safety. So I also handle some code enforcement cases, and we see some cases where people have short-term rentals in locations that don't have safe septics and water and things like that. And they didn't fall into that. They don't necessarily get caught up as a change of use, even though they're being used as a short-term rental, and because it's a commercial use and there's a constantly rotating population, you may be exposing more people over time to what's an unsafe condition than one person who decided to live there over a period of time. And there's not much knowledge of the consumer there. So at the state level, if there are more than 4 units, and they rent them out for a certain number of days in a year, then those become regulated as transient accommodations. They have certain safety standards. And we kind of have this niche where the short-term rentals don't get regulated like that. And there's a couple different approaches I've seen taken in different places. And what I think is most popular is if you have a location that is rented out for a certain number of short-term stays in a period of time, then that becomes regulated like a short-term rental. But this is a statewide problem and then a countywide problem. The more local you try to make that determination and that limitation, the more difficult it's going to be for developers to comply, for business owners to comply, for homeowners to comply. And I'm going to guess that we don't want to catch up the snowbirds who rent out their property for 2 weekends while they're gone. We want to provide some safety regulations and limitations on people who build these or use these locations as a business model only. So those are just some things to think about, that we're working within a state regulatory framework and some definitions there, and that this is a pretty complex problem, and short-term rentals probably need to be divided into more than one category when you're thinking about how they're used.
So what I guess I'll before we move on to a different topic, because I want to move us on because it's after 8. What I would ask the commissioners to do is, one, keep in mind goals and policies, not implementation, right? So implementation can be really important to help you frame your goals and policies, to understand like, well, there's certain things we can't do or whatever, better ways to do things. But what I'd like you to do when you're thinking about particularly new goals and policies is to stay at that high level, right? And so, and staff are definitely here to help. So start formulating those thoughts now. Gretchen, thank you for bringing it up. Obviously, this will be a hot issue for everybody to talk about. Start formulating that now. When we get into deliberations, staff can really help you. I want you to wait a little bit because I want you to benefit from all the testimony too, right? So let's make sure the rest of the community has their opportunity to speak, and then we'll have the opportunity to craft some new language if it's appropriate. Okay, let's move on to economic development. Preston, I really need to stop talking.
Good, because I love talking. All right. Okay, let's do a little exercise. I want everybody close your eyes. I want you to think back to a time you spent the afternoon in a town shopping and eating. Maybe you were on vacation. Maybe you were just spending the afternoon with friends or family. Picture what town you were in. What makes this area good for spending an afternoon eating and shopping? What does the street look like? What do the shops look like? Are you walking? Are you driving from place to place? Are you parking once and moving around? Go ahead, next slide, Megan. Okay, go ahead and open your eyes. Where were you? And what made that space for spending the afternoon eating and shopping work for you? I'd like to hear from each of the commissioners. I will start with Commissioner Spogan.
I was recently in Port Townsend with another gal my age. The town has grown in the last few years, but the shops were all open. They have a wonderful little theater that you can go in and watch, movies that you wouldn't see anyplace else. Lots of places to eat. You do walk. There is the water for having a cocktail in the evening and looking out over the water. There was plenty of places to stay. You could go and there was a big wedding there when we were there. So there was a lot of different little things. That's mine.
Okay. Commissioner Chastain.
So I'm going to talk about Sylva, North Carolina. And it is a very small town, but it's where my husband grew up. Very historic and a very, very sweet little shops to go in and out. The guest service is phenomenal. Coffee shops to sit. Like I said, historic courthouse, Jackson County Courthouse is there to visit. Just really a sweet town. Enjoyed it very much.
Okay. Commissioner Corbin.
Well, I just came from Disney World, so that doesn't count.
That's an urban planner's paradise right there, actually. So
It's somebody's paradise. No, I was actually drawn to Cannon Beach, Oregon, because I love the coast. I love to be able to, to drive here, walk around, enjoy the shops and different things, and then drive here and, enjoy the view. And So that's my ideal. I love to incorporate, walking, driving, all the senses, so, yeah.
Let's go to Zoom. How about Commissioner Fritsch?
Oh, this is hard for me because when I go on vacation, that's not the kind of trip that I take. I try to, if I want an urban experience, I go to like a city or like a Bend or somewhere like bigger. And then I love the neighborhoods there where you can park your car and just, do all the things. But yeah, I don't have a specific I kind of live in that place where people vacation. So when I vacation, I don't tend to go to places like this. So
I mean, Ben's a good one.
Ben's, yes,
Ben's a good
Ben's
answer.
actually a good example.
Yep.
yeah.
All right, Commissioner Russell. I think you might be
You're
muted,
muted.
Bob.
Walla Walla. I was just in Walla Walla, and I'm not usually a shopper or a browser, but I found myself doing that day, and has a very vibrant downtown.
All right, last is Commissioner Alves.
I mean, I guess I could think of a few places we've been, but yeah, the walkability aspect, I think, is of everywhere we've been. That there's some, Cannon Beach is one that we like to go to just to not be here, to be somewhere else. There's some places in South Carolina that we've been when we lived on the East Coast that were really cool. They're quiet, by some natural place, whether it's mountains or the ocean, but really walkable, lots of different places to go. Mostly not franchised businesses. I would say we're the main economic populace, things like that.
Okay. I think before we move on, I'll ask Mindy, let her weigh in.
Oh, I'd love to weigh in. I thought of Sandpoint, Idaho. I love Sandpoint, Idaho. I'm a skier, so Schweitzer, hi. And same thing, what Commissioner Alves just said, I totally agree with, downtown Sandpoint, there's no franchise businesses down there. And what I love is we'll go for an afternoon, right? We'll have lunch and then we'll hit a ton of shops and then we'll close sitting down on the Ponderay, Lake Ponderay there, have a cocktail before we head home. So yeah, Sandpoint was my place.
All right, next slide, Ming. Okay, so you might have all realized that you guys pretty much had similar answers for all your places. They were all fairly small. I mean, I've been to almost all of them except the one in North Carolina. So, they're not huge. They're not huge towns. And they all had something that made them work, right? First, the commercial uses were concentrated in an area of town. They weren't spread out all over the place. You could get to them pretty easily by walking, is something you all mentioned. They had a diversity of businesses. They had different restaurants. You guys mentioned coffee shops. I heard little it sounds like gift shops, souvenir shops. Usually they have bars. If you're like me, I like to go to the bars. They usually have different retail spaces. They might have galleries, right? So the place where you can go get art. They have a lot of small towns have professional offices, right? Dentists, maybe your realtor, a small doctor, kind of centrally in that area. You don't go there when you're visiting the town, but you probably walk by their fancy signs because they like to keep it cool and have the historic signs that are stenciled on the glass. Real estate, exactly. And they have a lot of them, like Packwood, have cultural centers like museums, right? So you visit the old courthouse, and if you don't visit it, it's at least there and it's cool and it adds to the vibe of the area that you're in. And then we already mentioned that they're walkable. You can park one time and you can go around. You don't have to drive from place to place. like you do when you visit larger towns. Next slide, Megan. So that's the goal of the economic development part of the Packwood plan, right? The goal focuses new commercial uses, new restaurants and stores in the red area on the map. Make sure that those new businesses are the same general size and shape as the existing amenities, so that they fit into that small town look and feel. This, along with the needed transportation improvement on Highway 12, will shape downtown so that it's more like the small town that you envisioned earlier. Maybe it looks like Sandpoint, Idaho. Maybe it looks like Sisters, Oregon. Might look like Kashmir, Washington. It might look like the city in North Carolina. And if in the future, larger commercial use that doesn't fit that wants to come in, they're going to go down in that gray. My instant recollection is I've recently been through Astoria. Astoria, Oregon is pretty similar to what you guys all described, but just outside of it, not very far, less than like a minute drive, is Warrenton. And Warrenton has Costco, Walmart, all the other chains, but you would never know they existed from the downtown of Astoria. So you get that feel, and then all those big guys aren't allowed there because they don't want to mess with the downtown feel of Astoria. That's what the gray area in the Packwood plan does. Next slide, Ming. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit about maybe about some of the things I thought this was gonna be Mindy's slide, but it's my slide apparently. No, it's okay. It's got my name on it, so I'm gonna do it. These are some of the things you might hear, right? So it's been said, we don't need to attract any more people to Packwood. We have enough tourists. That's probably true. Hundreds of thousands of tourists came through Packwood last year. This isn't about creating a destination town like Leavenworth. That's not what the community wanted. That's not what the plan is to represent. This is about taking advantage of the tourists that are already coming through Packwood. Instead of a family staying in an Airbnb, hiking Mount Rainier, getting dinner at the brewery and going back to their Airbnb, we want them to get dinner at the brewery, shop at a handful of stores, and then go back to their Airbnb. That's what you remembered when you closed your eyes, spending an afternoon eating and shopping. You were spending money and supporting the local economy. Packwood's economy wasn't always based on tourism. There was the lumber mill and the ranger station, but those are closed, and it created a recession in the early 2000s. Today, their economy is tourism. What Packwood needs to do is capitalize to maximize the dollars spent in Packwood by those tourists. Next slide, Megan. But it's not all about restaurants and shops. Packwood also needs electricians, needs plumbers, needs carpenters and mechanics. Packwood needs these professions to support hotels, Airbnbs, shops, restaurants. They all need skilled laborers. People who live in Packwood also need services such as the plumbers and carpenters, but they need vets, they need dentists, they need the pharmacy. The plan has goals about growing jobs of all kinds to support people living and working in Packwood. Before I turn it back over to Mindy, do you guys have any questions about the economic development portion?
No, I think you painted a really good picture because everything you were saying there about the Walgreens and the Walmarts and Costco being outside of the town really fits for what you're doing here with Packwood.
Yeah, and we're not saying that like Walmart's coming to town, right? But it maybe someday Walgreens or a bigger Ace wants to expand, right? So those stores are larger already, like the Rite Aid on the corner in Olympia, right down from my house, is larger than 90%, 99% of the businesses in Packwood already. So even those smaller kind of chains are already larger than what the community advisory committee wants, and they would go in that gray area.
Even a Safeway is probably larger than what would go in that kind of a feel for a downtown. But most towns want a place to get groceries more than your convenience store.
Can I ask a question, Preston?
Yes.
What was the conversation around? What are the barriers right now? What's preventing these things from coming in right now?
A lot of it's infrastructure capacity. So the sewer would be probably the biggest one. It's their septic.
So I mean, some of these downtown lots are quite large, and I don't necessarily think like a carpenter shop would need more than a toilet to operate, like unless it's going to be a hotel or a restaurant, which we do need more of, might need a sewer for that, but like a veterinary, I don't know. I just don't
Yeah.
feel like that is the only thing that's holding us back. And then also wouldn't bringing a sewer and make these properties much more valuable and expensive.
Yeah, I think probably your electrician, your plumber, your carpenter, those types of those businesses can actually be anywhere in the plan. A lot of those would be home-based businesses most likely. So they could be anywhere that they wanted to be. My hunch is that the reason they're not there now is that their economic base isn't large enough to support the work that they would need. And so it might be an induced demand for some of those skilled laborers. As you increase the amount of work that they need to do, you create an environment where an electrician might want to live in Packwood full time.
Let me add too, those empty lots that are located in downtown Packwood don't have a lot of incentive to sell, right? So because there isn't sewer in downtown Packwood yet, a lot of those property owners don't have a huge incentive to get rid of those properties. They can just rent them out during the flea market or whatever. When sewer shows up, the property value does go up, and the incentive to sell those properties goes up because now those property owners can make more money by selling it because they can sell it for the development at a capacity where a developer will come in and do that kind of development. So there is a little chicken and egg stuff going on with these things, but the plan says we should make sure that when those, empty lots develop, they should develop with commercial and mixed use type of development, and they should be scaled to fit the downtown area, not blow it up with something that's too big.
Did you talk at all about any other industry other than tourism?
Absolutely. One of the biggest problems Packwood's going to have about attracting any other type of industry out there is how far it is located from I-5. There is a lot of available land on I-5 where the transportation for moving goods and services is right there. The gray area on the map would still allow light industrial uses. There's no precluding industrial uses from that space in there. Those would be compatible with large scale commercial as well, right? Because you're not looking at light industrial next to a lot of residential. But Packwood is going to have a difficult time attracting any kind of light industrial. Probably the biggest market that could form there would be something very specialized. So think like specialty furniture, something super, super specialized that they can afford the transportation costs of getting those goods back out to I-5 to move them. Or they can sell in a market where people are coming to hike and then they're there and they'll buy some funky, weird chair to take back with them when they leave. So it's a difficult market to try and attract industry to. Yeah, you can, those specialty niche industries absolutely can be lucrative in communities like this. It's just, you're not going to get a lot of big industry, which is a bummer. I mean, I know this is going on to these, like, what are you going to hear from people? People would love to have that type of industry back in Packwood. When the mill closed, that was devastating for that town. Absolutely devastating. It caused a huge recession. It made families leave because they needed jobs other places. It was huge. I struggle to think of what we would be able to attract out there that could fill that kind of a niche.
Oh, so is all of this hinging on sewer?
No,
So there's still an economic development plan and changes that might, stuff that we could change, zoning or regulation or otherwise, that would also work towards encouraging.
yeah, even if sewer doesn't come, the consolidation of high intensity commercial uses towards the center there will be helpful. There's also some policies in there, if you go back and take a look, that speak to working with our partners like Economic Alliance and others to work on economic plans and bringing more businesses out to East County. So it isn't just about the zoning piece. It's just the zoning is probably the most tangible piece that we can talk about, but the policies include a lot more than that. There's some education pieces too, about trying to provide additional education around skilled labor. That's actually, Packwood's actually a great location to provide education around skilled labor. So there's quite a bit in there.
Mindy and Preston also, I've noticed at some of the small towns that I go to that I enjoy the old part of the town as a tourist. The new part of the town, which is the the working part for the people that actually live there. It's separate and they don't go into the old part of the town when all of us tourists have flooded in for the weekend. How are you planning on that for this gray area? It seems like it's so far in the future, but I suppose it doesn't necessarily be, but how are you going to get the people from Packwood into that area and on flea market day?
Oh, you're not on flea market day. Okay, I'll just
There's
say
no
right
way.
now, on flea market day, those of us who live there, yeah, we don't go down there.
Yeah.
Nobody goes down there on flea market day. No, absolutely not. Flea market day, you don't leave because it's like hours of
Right.
waiting.
Right.
The transportation plan though does talk to additional transportation improvements that are needed for your regular.
Yeah, because it'll kind
Weekend.
of create a kind of a new town there, really, because your people are going to shop there because of the value. That's where it's going to be less expensive to shop. They're not going to go to the downtown.
Most of those downtown areas, one of the things that works well is that the transportation has been planned well. And right now, Highway 12 is not planned well because it's not planned based on what is going on today in that town, right? Highway 12 has not been improved based on the fact that hundreds of thousands of tourists are coming in. We do have a transportation concept plan in here. Do encourage everybody to take a look at it. We've also applied for a grant to get money to do a specific corridor plan. So you'll see policies in here about transportation like traffic calming at some intersections, but we don't say what that is. Nobody talks about what the traffic calming is. It says we need to designate parking. Doesn't say anything specific about that. Needs to be more walkable. Doesn't say specifically how you get there. The corridor plan, which we would do in conjunction with WashDOT because it is their facility, we would actually come up with the specifics. What do we actually do based on the transportation needs of that area so that it functions? And part of that functioning is that is a highway. We need to move goods and services on it. The big rigs need to go through, right? So it is a complicated question about how you make that space work, and it needs a specific plan associated with it. That's another step. There's so much to do. There's so much to do.
All right, any more questions?
Should we move on to what y'all are going to hear?
Yep, let's do that.
Okay. We did do a lot of public engagement as part of this, and a lot over 1 year, which was just a crazy amount. But you know what? If you ask 100 people what they want in the future, you get 100 answers, right? Not everyone supports all aspects of this plan. That's just the way it is, right? Not everybody's going to love everything in here. And so you are going to hear from people who don't like things in this plan, right? And that's what we want. We want to hear from people so we can better incorporate. The biggest statement that you are going to hear is stop the development, right? That's really that's the biggest thing we heard in all of our surveys and all this. People want this to stop. right? If you've been living here a long time, this feels pretty awful. It really does. And what I have experienced talking with people is people are really sad. They have lost a way of life. It's gone. It's already gone. And it makes them frankly very sad. And you're going to hear that. You're going to hear some emotion in people's voices. You're going to hear that this growth that they've been experiencing over the past few years is really devastating to them and they want it to quit. We can't, I mean, I hate to go back to this, but we really can't stop the growth. We can't stop people from developing their properties, from selling their properties. It's not something that you can come in and do because people do have the right to do those things. Again, we're trying to manage and direct this thing, right? This train is going, let's figure out how to manage and direct it. That's where we're at on that. The second biggest thing that you're going to hear, stop the tourists from taking over town. I hear you. I mean, I think Gretchen can talk to it. I can talk to it personally. During the summer on a Friday night, I do not go downtown. It is insane, right? Got it. Again, that ship has sailed. Packwood is known. It's known very well. It is an incredible destination. The place that it is located in is amazing. And that cat out of the bag, we're not going to get it back in. We need to manage it. We need to figure out how to improve the transportation system. We need to figure out how to grow the local economy. We need to figure out how to house the people that are working in that town. That's what needs to happen so that Packwood doesn't just get destroyed by the tourism. And you've seen that happen in other communities. That is something that can absolutely happen.
Mindy, can I add to that
Please
tour
do.
thing is that I do think that there's quite an imbalance right now between what we are offering tourists. Like there is certainly no shortage of places for people to stay. So that capacity, that has overinflated our capacity. We still only have one grocery store and 3 restaurants and 1 coffee shop. So I don't know if there's anything we can do in this plan or otherwise to sort of make sure that we're not growing in an imbalanced way. We're not offering like 500 gas stations when there's no place for anyone to park, or, you know, like it doesn't make sense to like create more and more bed space when we have no more restaurant space, or, you know, or hardly any more shops really. I mean, that's kind of the weird thing. It's like the business that's easiest to get off the ground and easiest to make money on is the sleeping accommodations, but there's a real lag behind in the what do we do when we get here accommodations. And I don't know how to steer that. And I don't know if there is a way, but that's kind of where we are right now.
Yep. That town is way out of whack. You're absolutely right. So, right, you know, writing a few things is important, and a lot of the stuff in the plan tries to speak to that. So the plan alone, by the way, is not going to solve all these problems. We have the corridor plan for transportation, and there's some sewer stuff. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to happen, but the plan is intended to help direct it. So you're absolutely right. And things need to be right-sized. You are going to hear from people that they do not want to be in this plan. Right? Take my property out of it. Just please keep in mind, we cannot spot zone. We cannot create an island of zoning with everything else around it that's very, very different. That boundary, the Packwood area boundary, that's pretty much the water service area if you're east of the Cowlitz River. So it's taken in the area pretty much where there is a public service available, and that's water. So we're not going to yank somebody out and spot zone around them. Fourth, oddly, you're going to hear about short-term rentals. We've already talked about it. I won't keep going into it. You're going to hear about it a lot, and we need to address it probably for this area. Fifth, you're going to hear people ask for specific land use designations, and I'm going to give you a mapped example in just a second that we've already heard. And it's just an example because we've heard a few, but the biggest one you've already seen is the new mill owners put before you last time. Some suggested changes to that concept map. So they're asking for some different land use stuff. You can absolutely consider it, but I'll show you an example of how it was. These were asked to the advisory committee and how they considered it. So you can consider those. I don't want to keep you from considering that. So let's look at one example in the next slide. This was a specific request that the advisory committee received. The pink, again, says no new traffic generating commercial uses should be allowed, only residential and home-based, new residential. There's a hotel in that circle, right? It's the south end of sort of what is Packwood proper, and there's a hotel right there. It's existing, so it can stay, it can be maintained, it could be replaced in its footprint. The property next door to the hotel is a single family house. The owner asked for all commercial uses to continue on that property, to be allowed to continue on that property, because she would like in the future the option of developing something commercial on her property. That request was presented to the advisory committee for consideration. The they discussed it in depth. It wasn't light. They had a conversation about it. They decided that creating an isolated pocket of commercial uses that far from the downtown core would defeat from the purpose of consolidating commercial uses. So they said no, they didn't think that that was appropriate in this location, and they left it at pink. There's been some other requests too that had similar conversations, and then there were some changes that were made. So again, if you want me to go through all those, I can. They're all in that public participation. Every single advisory committee has all of its notes in there and all of those conversations, so you can look at that. I expect this person will come back and ask you because she didn't get what she wanted, right? And that's perfectly fine. And you can absolutely consider that again. I just ask that you think about it in the context of the whole plan, right? We don't give preferential treatment to individual property owners. We think of concepts and plans that are appropriate for the entire town long-term. So just keep that in your mind. Next slide. The sixth thing you're going to hear about, people are going to come up and they say, I don't want roundabouts. Literally, that could be their only piece of testimony they want to share. I don't want sidewalks. You're going to hear a lot about what they do not want on Highway 12, right? I get it. Everybody has really strong feelings about these things. I completely understand. And people have gotten really passionate in some of the conversations with us about things like roundabouts. So I expect that to happen. The policies say nothing about how you implement, right? The policies say traffic calming, walking paths. Traffic calming can be crosswalks. That's traffic calming. Rumble strips are traffic calming. Certainly you can go extreme. A stoplight is traffic calming, right? I mean, it's a huge realm of what traffic calming is. The plan doesn't say how to do it. It just says traffic calming at these intersections. Same with walking paths. Walking paths can literally just be that the type of material is different. So you see a physical demarcation of where people walk, right? They can be off street, on street. There's all kinds of ways that you can do things to implement the policies that are in this plan. So we will continue to encourage people to speak to the policies, but it's hard when your brain, you guys all have experienced this. It's hard when your brain wants to go to how do you implement it, and you start getting scared of what implementation might mean, and we're just not there yet. We will have a moment to argue roundabouts, I promise you, but this is not it. Okay.
Mindy, Eric has his hand up.
Yes, Eric.
Hi, I wanted to just return to your point about specific future land use designation changes for number 5. And if you wouldn't, could you go back to the future land use map real quick, the way that you, thank you. So I think there is one specific future land use designation that you likely will hear testimony about that was a little bit later coming than most of the stuff considered by the Citizen Advisory Committee. And it also is a sort of elephant in the room that is different, I think, in kind than other specific requests you might hear, and that is for the Packwood Mill site. The Packwood Mill site and the surrounding land takes up a very large portion of that gray area on the map. And because it's so large, and because it represents such a significant portion of the plan's view about commercial areas, I think that it's very likely that the commission you will be asked to decide whether you want to make a change to reflect that particular developer's proposals. Again, because they bought it well into the process that was already ongoing. They didn't really have that much opportunity to pitch stuff to the Citizen Advisory Committee. And I wanted to make the commission aware that they're going to be getting that, and that probably I don't mean it to sound unfair, but just because they own such a big, significant portion of the area, and because their property ownership can drive a lot of what happens in Packwood, you probably are going to need to listen closely to what they want and see how consistent or inconsistent it is with the plan for the whole area. And if it's consistent with the plan for the whole area, I would encourage you to consider making small changes to accommodate that. Because just to be fair, remember that they did not have the same opportunity as other landowners to come in because they bought it, when the process was already a 1.5 years old. Thank you.
Yeah, and Eric, you may not know, we've already seen the preliminary request from the mill and submitted it to the Planning Commission. I also shared it with the advisory committee as well, and we'll be sharing their responses to that with the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
no, that's absolutely, but your point is well taken. It's a huge portion of the land. So what happens at that site is pretty critical going forward. So a couple slides forward, not down, forward is just, I just want to open it up now before I have some process things to cover before we close for the night, but I just want to open it up. Do you guys have other questions from the Subarea plan? I'm hoping everybody has a chance to read it, has already read it, and has written down any other questions you guys have for me. So pepper questions at this point. Everybody has no questions. You got it. Understand the plan. I mean, it's very high level
We kind of
stuff.
interrupted and just asked him as we were going.
I know. It's very high level stuff. So it's not, there isn't a tremendous amount it's not like reading code. It's not a tremendous amount of detail.
Would you pop that map back up? This is Bob. The last map's fine. This is a question I asked a while back, and it's probably my fault. I probably have not asked it correctly enough times. So we've got this dark red area on here that we talk about. We'd like to drive commercial into that area. And we would like the pink area or rose or whatever color it is. That's going to be single family homes. Generally speaking, that's what we're talking about, correct?
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay, so the sewer that we're talking about, this is my question. We know the sewer is going to go where this bright red is, but isn't the expectation that sewer will be in all of this pink area because that's the area that has all the problems?
I would be shocked if sewer serves that entire pink area ever, especially as you go to the northeast because of the hilliness of that space. I don't think that's going to be economical to
Okay.
serve up there at all. I think over time, as money and development occurs, so as there's more appropriation from the state or there is development occurs, you could see expansion of sewer to serve more of the core around Highway 12.
But the things you're talking about, like, in the future, we could get some increased density in housing near this bright red. That's only if the sewer pushes out into those areas, right? That allow that?
Not necessarily. So you're going to continue to hear from Eric and I in other meetings about ideas we have about how we might be able to get additional affordable housing types without sewer. And so there's sort of a complementary conversation that we will continue to have that could apply in some of that purple space, maybe in that map. And as time goes forward, you may see sewer in some of those spaces too, which would allow other types. So, it's a 20-year plan. So think 20 years. There's the immediate, because sewer needs to be installed or needs to be under construction or maybe installed. I'd have to check in 2026. So there's an immediate, but then there's this is a 20-year plan.
I guess it just seems like there's a really high correlation factor to where the sewer goes, where density is going. So my question is sort of, why are we worried about manipulating Packwood? It's never been manipulated for 100 years. If we put the sewer downtown, that's where everything's going to go. And as it spreads out, you're gonna keep adding density, so do you need to, because someday maybe sewer's down there at the bottom where that little black circle is, and then she
And
wants
you
to put,
change the plan. So plans get looked at frequently because things change. Why do you want to do this? Because you want to direct how that growth happens. So I'd urge you to please look at the discussions that were had that led to that shape and the discussion around that commercial area, the dark purple. So even if sewer were to serve this entire space, this is the future that the advisory committee is recommending in terms of consolidating those uses. Because this is, a 20-year look. We don't know.
yeah, I just wouldn't jump to the conclusion that because somebody doesn't agree with you, Mindy, that they didn't read the plan.
No, I'm not
So
saying. I'm not saying
I appreciate that I'm encouraged to read the plan, but
Hey,
Thank
Bob,
you.
It's about focusing where that development is regardless of sewer. So if theoretically the sewer goes throughout the whole sub area plan, what the community advisory committee is saying is that if we didn't change anything and we left it as small town mixed use, you could have apartments throughout this whole area right now. So you could have apartments all the way down at the bottom where that circle is. You could have apartments out towards the west past Hideaway Lane. That's what the current zoning would allow. So what the community advisory committee is saying is we want that density, but we want that density to be at Highway 12. So regardless of whether the infrastructure can support higher densities throughout the sub area plan or not, we want the core density to be along that corridor that's that bright red on the map.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. This is the reason why I'm pointing back to looking at that public participation plan, which I'm asking that the commissioners take a look at, is because this is the advisory committee's recommendation, not my recommendation about what to do. So I actually tried really hard to keep my fingers out of it as much as possible, even though I live out there and this will impact me. The advisory committee worked really hard on that, focusing particularly around commercial uses and mixed uses, and really was very, very thoughtful in producing where they'd like to see that area in terms of how it would function, in terms of how it would impact the neighborhoods. And they also really listened to the wider public asking for as much of the space as they can to be preserved in a much lower density rural type of way of living, and that they really wanted that downtown core to be preserved in a small town type of use, and to not end up with things getting, really blown out of proportion.
Essentially, what you're trying to do is grow the town there. There really isn't a whole lot of town there.
It's not
But
a
you're
lot of
trying
whole
to
lot town.
say that we're going to need more town. We're going to grow it in there, and the people are going to live in the other areas.
Yeah,
So you're just encouraging that you actually make a town of Packwood.
if this whole plan were implemented as it's written, Packwood would start to look like a town that you would more likely think of as a town, and it would have
Because
more
now it's
supportive
kind of more
services.
like, even though it's got some wonderful little aspects, it's kind of more of a like
Yeah.
freeway drive-through.
Well, and the other big aspect that the advisory committee again is going for is, because in the future that commercial use can kind of go anywhere, is focus it. Try not to let that commercial spread out and have bigger impacts to all of the neighborhoods around it. Try to keep it nice and tight.
I just had one quick question, and that is, I don't know how many developers that you have out in Packwood, or if it's just individuals buying land and building for their own use. Don't know that question. But with developers, are you asking for impact fees to help the town?
The county has no impact fees.
Okay, but
And this is just
Town.
the county. This is not a town.
thank you.
Yeah. So no, the
Thank you.
county has no impact fees. I mean, that's one of the issues about why Packwood needs to direct itself through a sub-area plan is it's not a town. It doesn't have a city council. It is under the county jurisdiction.
And I take it that the decision not to have impact fees was made long ago and
It comes up every once in a while.
You can't just implement them in one specific place, right? So we wouldn't, so the commissioners
Right.
wouldn't be able to say, we want impact fees just if you're developing in Packwood. They would have to do it countywide and don't know that they're ready to do that.
yeah.
Cities can do it. I mean, right, because the city's a separate jurisdiction, so cities can have impact fees.
But I didn't associate, I always think of Packwood as a town. It's not, so what do you call it?
Well, it's an unincorporated area or a
unincorporated
LAMERD. We
area.
call it a LAMERD. It's a local, limited area of more intense rural development. The weird thing about Packwood is it's bigger in population and size than Mossy Rock. And Mossy Rock is a town. And this is because Mossy Rock incorporated before the thresholds for incorporation were put into place at the state level. So we've got, multiple towns that are towns with their own jurisdiction and authority that are smaller than Packwood. And that's the way it is at this point.
All right, Mindy.
Let's do process so we can get out of here.
9:00.
Let's process it. I just want to make sure everybody asks their question. Okay, let's process this thing. Next slide. Okay, question for you. Are you ready for a hearing? This is your question. So we've done 2 workshops on this. In deciding, are you ready for a hearing, which you don't have to vote on. I just need yes or no on if we want to go to a hearing, is have you exhausted your questions? I feel like you have because you're not asking me a bunch more questions. But if you need more information from me or have more questions of me, then we should continue to have workshops. If you're ready to hear from the public, we should move on.
So
to a hearing.
refresh us just briefly, Mindy. If we choose tonight to go forward, we go to a public hearing, which we would have in March. And at that point, we're going to get testimony from all the people that have, want to let us know something. And then after that, we're going to discuss what we learned. And then after that, we can vote.
That's right. Yeah. So I know you guys often, because things are not as complicated, will hear testimony, deliberate and vote on the same night. I would highly recommend you do not do that with this one. I would recommend that you take testimony. Maybe you start your deliberations. That's perfectly fine. And then you continue. You don't take any more testimony, but you continue the hearing. You continue your deliberations. It wouldn't surprise me if this might take a few continuations and times of deliberation before you got to where you're ready to make a vote on it. So yeah, there's not going to be a hurry at the end at all.
Right.
You guys can take your time with it. I think that's appropriate with something like this.
And we're making a recommendation to the county commissioners.
That's right.
The final
Eventually.
product. So we're
Yeah,
not,
right.
yeah. So
So tonight, are we ready to go forward to a public hearing? Like Mindy said, we don't have to take a vote, so let's go through and ask everybody if we're ready. So you want to talk?
I think we're ready. Yes, let's go forward.
All right, Brian,
I'm ready for public hearing.
Gretchen? Unmute, please.
Sorry.
That's
Yeah.
okay.
I'm exhausted and I've exhausted my questions, I think. So yeah, let's hear what the people say.
Okay, and Jason,
Yeah, I'm ready.
Bob?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Slide is our schedule.
Yeah.
I was hoping you guys would be ready because I want to hear from the public too. So we did our workshop. The notice of hearing will go out on February 24th. So that's when the public can start writing testimony in at that point. So, and we will advertise far and wide. If we end up with a third staff report, another staff report, or I guess we haven't really done a staff report. What am I saying. We've given you the plan. We haven't really added any supplemental information into it. If we ended up needing to provide supplemental information, you would get a staff report on March 3rd, but I'm not sure that you're going to get a staff report on this. And then you'll have your hearing on March 14th. A reminder, that is at the Packwood Community Hall. There will be a Zoom option, but I would ask that the commissioners make every effort to get out to Packwood. Please carpool if you can, but 3 or fewer, so you don't create a quorum. And I would also recommend, if you are going to go out, go a little early. This is not a quasi judicial action. You can drive around town. You can eat at a restaurant. You can talk to as many people as you want. This is legislative. So I would recommend, if you're able to get out there for the hearing, go early. See the town, drive around. Stop at the Thrift and Gift. No, it's not open on Tuesdays. That's my favorite store, but it's not open on Tuesdays, but Thrift and Gift's the best. So that's the schedule. I want to leave you just with this for any members of the public who have not gone to bed yet. That's the web page. That little QR code, use your smartphone, takes you to the web page. The plan is there. All the background information is there. If you have questions, public, email me. I'm happy to talk to anybody about the plan.
Is everything that we discussed tonight on there as well as this program that you gave us?
The presentations right now are living under your guys's calendar, but we'll get them moved over.
Okay.
Yep, we'll get everything moved over to that one page so that everybody can see it in one place.
All right. Mindy, is there any good of the order?
Of course there is. I need to remember what I wrote down though. Hold on.
You made us some binders.
I did. There we go. Okay. I have 3 things. Next time you guys are going to get 3-ring binders, and they will include a cheat sheet that provides you just the basic process and phrases that you can use during your meeting. So this is a cheat sheet that we'll walk through. It also includes an overview of the Planning Commission authority. So you guys have all seen that presentation, but it's in there, so reminders. And then it has blank pages for taking notes, and I'll talk more about taking notes. The binders are going to be ready next time. We're going to email you all the information ahead of time so that when we walk through it, you can ask me questions about what's in there. We'll hold on to the binders and have them for you every single time. We've put your guys' names on them. For those of you who are typically on Zoom, if you want a physical binder, not just the emailed copy, let me know. We'll get it to you. We'll either mail it over to you or I'll drive it to you on my way home. I hit most places on my way home. I have a long drive. And we'll walk through it next time. I wanted to let you know that Planning Commission, thanks to Megan, has its own YouTube channel. We're YouTube stars. We were hijacking and living on the Board of County Commissioners YouTube, and we now have our very own. So we'll put links in stuff starting so people can go look at our stuff on our own YouTube.
And Mindy uses the word stars
Yeah.
loosely.
Yeah. YouTube stars. We have tens and tens of likes.
She means superstars.
Yeah. Tens and tens of likes, you guys.
Yeah, well, there's, let me see. 1, 2, 3.
That's right.
4, 5.
Hey, don't forget it. yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So you're not
And
on there.
don't forget about your significant others and,
That's
you
true.
know, parents and kids that are just dying. That's it for me.
Okay.
I'm done.
Do any of the commissioners have any items for the good of the order? I agree. Well, yes, for you guys that have to go back up the mountain. Okay, so the next meeting is February 28th. The agenda is comprehensive plan housing allocations. Anything else?
No, yeah, we will do that training on the binder, and then we will again get into the techie stuff of the housing allocations again.
Okay. Thank you, Preston, for helping us out tonight. That was
My pleasure.
appreciated. Okay, a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Seconded.
The meeting's adjourned.
Very